Beatrice Langford's voice cut through the crowded general store like a blade through cheap cotton. "My lord," she said, loud enough for every soul in the room to hear, pressing a gloved hand to her chest, as if the very sight caused her physical pain. Someone let the circus into town. Her daughter Cecily spun around, and the moment her eyes landed on Eliza Harroway, standing near the medicine shelf, she laughed the kind of laugh that wasn't embarrassed about itself at all. "That poor dress," Cecily announced to the room, "is fighting harder than the seams holding it together." A man near the Cracker Barrel snorted. A woman by the window covered her smile with her hand, but didn't bother hiding it long. The laughter moved through the store the way fire moves through dry grass, quick, careless, and hot. Eliza stood there holding a small brown bottle of medicine, her coins already counted in her palm, her face perfectly still. And not one person in that store thought to stop it. If this story already has your heart beating faster, subscribe to our channel right now so you don't miss a single chapter of what happens next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. These stories have traveled further than we ever imagined, and we want to see exactly how far this one goes. Now let's go back to that store in Copper Ridge, Wyoming, and find out what kind of woman Eliza Harroway really was. The summer of 1886 had not been kind to Copper Ridge. The creek that ran along the eastern edge of town had dropped 2 feet since May. The grass in the lower pastures had gone yellow by June. 3 families on the North Road had already sold their cattle at a loss and were quietly talking about whether they'd make it through to spring. The heat sat on the valley like a hand pressing down, and everyone felt it, the ranchers with their cracking soil, the shopkeepers, watching customers count coins twice before spending them, and the women who mended the same clothes season after season because new ones were simply not a thing they could afford. Eliza Harroway had ridden into town in the back of a borrowed wagon, seated beside 2 crates of eggs she'd traded for the ride, because the 3 miles between her cabin and Copper Ridge's Main Street was too far to walk in the heat with a bottle of medicine to carry back. She was 27 years old. She had a round, soft face, warm hazel eyes that missed very little, and a body that had been shaped not by leisure but by work wide in the hips, strong in the arms, heavy-set in the way of a woman who hauled water every morning and split her own firewood and had been doing both since she was 14 years old. Her brown dress had been mended at both elbows and along the left side seam. She had done the repairs herself, with small, even stitches that were, objectively, more careful than the original construction. She was not ashamed of the dress. She had made the best of what she had, and she knew the difference between the two. What she had not fully prepared herself for on that particular Tuesday morning was Beatrice Langford. Beatrice was the wife of Gerald Langford, who owned the Copper Ridge Savings and Loan and 2 of the larger cattle operations in the county, and who had the particular quality of a man who had been comfortable so long. He had forgotten comfort was not a universal condition. Beatrice had absorbed her husband's confidence without his occasional restraint. She wore her dresses pressed and her opinions unfiltered, and she treated the general store on Tuesday mornings the way other women treated their parlors as a place where she held court. She was standing near the fabric bolts when Eliza came through the door, talking with 2 other women, whose names Eliza knew, but whose circles she had never moved in. Beatrice's daughter Cecily stood beside her, 17 and bored, and looking for something to sharpen herself against. Eliza moved directly to the medicine shelf. She knew what she needed and had counted the cost before she left home. Dr. Harding had told her 2 weeks ago that Mabel's cough was nothing worse than a persistent irritation of the lungs brought on by the dry summer air, but that it would worsen without the tincture. And Eliza had spent the last 11 days taking in 3 extra mending orders to cover the price of it. She had the coins ready in her dress pocket. She was going to make this quick. She had the bottle in her hand and was turning toward the counter when Beatrice Langford's voice arrived. "My lord." The words were soft enough to sound polite and loud enough to carry. Someone let the circus into town. Eliza stopped moving. She didn't turn around. She stood with her back to the room and her hand around the medicine bottle, and she took one breath, slow and even, the way she had taught herself to do when something hit her before she was ready for it. Then Cecily laughed. "That poor dress," the girl said, and her voice had a carrying quality that her mother had clearly cultivated in her, is fighting harder than the seams holding it together. Laughter. Immediate and comfortable, the kind that comes from people who have laughed at the same kinds of things before and feel safe doing it again. A man near the Cracker Barrel, one of the Marsh brothers, Eliza thought, though she couldn't be certain, let out a low, appreciative snort. One of the women with Beatrice said something quiet that Eliza couldn't hear, but that produced another ripple of amusement. Someone else, near the window, said, "Can't tell where the dress ends and the woman begins," and that got the biggest laugh of all. Eliza turned around then. She did it slowly, because she was not going to let them see her spin. She held the medicine bottle in one hand and her coins in the other, and she looked at the room, at the man still smiling near the Cracker Barrel, at the women by the fabric, at Cecily with her bright, cruel, 17-year-old face, and she looked at all of it with an expression that gave nothing away. Then she walked to the counter. Tom Briggs, who ran the store and was a decent enough man when no one was watching him to be otherwise, kept his eyes on the countertop while he took her coins and wrapped the bottle in paper. He didn't say anything. He didn't tell the Langford women to mind themselves. Counted the change and set it near Eliza's hand without quite making contact, the way a person does when they want to stay out of something while benefiting from the fact that it happened. "Thank you," Eliza said. Her voice was steady. She picked up the package. "No amount of good fabric is going to solve that problem," Cecily said from across the room. She was still looking at Eliza, still smiling. Some things just aren't meant to be dressed up. Beatrice made no attempt to quiet her daughter. Eliza's face was hot. Not with tears, she refused that. Had been refusing it for years, but with the specific, burning heat of being publicly reduced to some smaller than you are, in front of people who were all going to go home and eat supper and sleep and not think about it again, while you carried it with you all the way back to a cabin where your sick mother was waiting. She was 2 steps from the door when the chair scraped. It was a particular sound, heavy, deliberate, not accidental. Kind of sound a large man makes when he decides to stand up. Eliza heard it and felt rather than saw the room shift. The laughter didn't stop immediately, but it changed quality. It became uncertain. She turned slightly, just enough to see. At a table near the back of the store, one of the 2 the shopkeeper kept for men waiting on orders or conducting informal business, sat a man she recognized by reputation more than by acquaintance. Wade Colter was not someone you missed if you had lived in the county more than a season. 38, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of face that had been out too long to be called handsome in any conventional way, but that held something more useful, which was a quality of settled attention. He had the Broken Spur Ranch to the northwest, 1,200 acres, that his father had homesteaded and that Wade had expanded through 20 years of work that people in town respected, even when they didn't particularly like him. He was not laughing. He had not laughed at any point. He was looking at Beatrice Langford with an expression that was not exactly anger. It was quieter than anger, and somehow worse. It was the expression of a man who has seen something beneath a person that he will not be able to unsee. "Mr. Colter," Beatrice said, with the particular brightness of a woman who is suddenly aware she has been observed. "I heard what you were just doing," Wade said. His voice was not loud. He didn't raise it even slightly. That was what made the room go so completely silent. He walked to the counter, not toward the Langford women, not toward Eliza, to the counter, where he addressed Tom Briggs directly. "Those fabric bolts," he said. "The blue wool, the brown canvas, the 2 rolls of linen in the back. What do you want for them?" Tom blinked. "All of them?" "Whatever you've got. Figure the price." Cecily looked at her mother. Beatrice's mouth had done something complicated. Tom worked through the calculation twice, like a man who isn't sure he heard the question correctly. Then he named a number. Wade paid it without discussion. Counted the bills from his coat pocket, set them on the counter, and then he turned and looked toward Eliza, who had stopped moving entirely and was standing near the door with her package and her change, and an expression that was very carefully giving nothing away. "She chooses first," Wade said. "Whatever she wants from what I just bought, it's hers." The silence in the store had the quality of a room where no one is breathing. Beatrice Langford's face had gone very still in the way that expensive things go still when they're about to break. Cecily was no longer smiling. The man by the Cracker Barrel was suddenly deeply interested in the floor. Eliza looked at Wade Colter for a long moment. She looked at the fabric he had just purchased. She looked at the women by the bolts, who had been laughing 60 seconds ago and were now finding other places to direct their attention. Then she walked back to the counter, past all of them, and she stood beside Wade and she said, in a voice that was quieter even than his, "That was kind of you." "Wasn't kindness," Wade said. "What was it then?" He picked up his receipt from the counter. "Common sense. My men need shirts." He paused, and it needed to be said. Eliza set her package down on the counter. "I appreciate what you did," she said. "And I'm not taking the fabric." Something moved across Wade's face, surprise, she thought, though he controlled it fast. "Why not?" "Because I don't need a rich man buying my dignity." She said it evenly, without heat, the way she said most things that mattered. "Still got mine. The purchasing wasn't necessary." Wade looked at her for a moment. A real look, the kind people rarely gave in public, the kind that was actually trying to understand something rather than simply move past it. "You're right," he said. "Dignity isn't mine to give you." "I wasn't trying to give it." "Then what were you trying to do?" "Make them stop," he said, and they did. Eliza picked her package back up. "They stopped because of your money, not because of anything they understood." Probably true. He didn't argue it, but they stopped. She looked at him for another beat. "I have 20 men on the Broken Spur," Wade said, with a slight shift in tone, moving from what had just happened to what he was actually thinking about. "Ranch hands. They go through shirts and trousers at a rate that would embarrass you. I've been sending to Cheyenne for replacements for 3 years, and the quality is poor and the fit is worse." He paused. "I saw the stitching on the tear at your left sleeve. Even the repair is better work than anything I've been paying for." Eliza glanced down at her elbow and then back at him. "I'm offering paid work," Wade said. "Shirts, work trousers, whatever the men need. Materials provided from whatever stock I just bought, if you're willing to use it. Prices, your schedule, your conditions. I have no interest in telling you how to do what you clearly already know how to do." The room was still quiet. Beatrice had not moved. Eliza looked at Wade. She looked at the fabric. She thought about the bottle of medicine wrapped in paper under her hand, and about the 3 extra orders she had taken to pay for it, and about the fact that her mother's cough was worse in the mornings and better by afternoon, and that doctor. Harding had said to come back in 6 weeks regardless. "What's your rate?" she said. Wade named a figure. Eliza shook her head. "That's low for the work you're describing." "What's fair, then?" she told him. She told him the number without apology, with the specificity of a woman who had priced her labor carefully and was not going to negotiate herself into charity. Wade said, "Agreed. I'll need the materials brought to my cabin. I don't have a way to transport bulk fabric." "Done. I set my own deadlines. I won't be rushed. I'm not asking you to be. And I work alone. No one from your ranch comes to check on progress or suggest changes mid-construction. If there's a problem, you tell me when you collect the finished order, and I address it in the next one." "Reasonable," Wade said. Eliza picked up her package. "First delivery of materials by Friday. I'll have a test shirt completed by end of the following week. If you don't like the fit, we renegotiate or we stop." "Fair enough." She nodded once, in the way of someone who has concluded a business transaction, not in the way of someone who is grateful for a rescue. Then she walked out of the store. She was 3 steps down the porch before she heard Beatrice Langford's voice again, lower now, tighter. "Well, she certainly has opinions." And Wade Colter's voice, even yes. "She does." Eliza told her mother about the arrangement that evening, sitting at the small table near the window where the last of the daylight came through. Mabel Harroway was 53 years old and had the kind of face that had once been very pretty and was now merely distinctive. With deep-set eyes the same hazel as her daughter's, and a persistent cough that she interrupted with careful control whenever she thought Eliza was watching. "Wade Colter," Mabel said, repeating the name the way you repeat something to hear how it sits. "The Broken Spur man, yes. I've heard he's difficult." "I've heard he's private," Eliza said. "Those aren't the same thing." "You like him. I don't know him well enough to like him. Eliza was mending a child's jacket that belonged to the Pierce family 3 roads over. She didn't look up. I think he's fair. I think he means what he says. That's enough to work with. Mabel coughed once, twice, then controlled it. What happened in the store today? Eliza had given her a shortened version on her return medicine delivered, arrangement made, wagon back before dark. She hadn't included the Langford women. She included them now, because her mother had a way of noticing omissions. Mabel's listened without interrupting. When Eliza finished, she was quiet for a moment. "And you didn't cry," Mabel said. "No." "Good." Mabel reached across and touched the back of Eliza's hand once, briefly. "Don't ever let them have that." The first delivery from the Broken Spur arrived Thursday, a day early, which Eliza noted as either impatience or efficiency, and either way, it told her something. Canvas and linen were good quality, better than she typically worked with. There was also a heavier wool she hadn't discussed with Wade, dark charcoal gray, clearly expensive, clearly not intended for work shirts. She set it aside in its wrapping. She would ask about it when he came to collect. The first test shirt took her 4 days because she made it 3 times. Not because the first 2 were wrong, they were correct by any reasonable measurement, but because correct wasn't what she was after. She had worked with ranch hands dimensions before, the particular challenges of men who were broad through the back and long in the arm, and who needed range of motion in the shoulders that standard sizing never accounted for. The third shirt solved all of it, and she looked at it hanging on the wall peg and felt the specific quiet satisfaction of work that had been done, as well as she knew how to do it. She had also, in the days between, taken on 2 additional household accounts from women in town who had heard, through the particular speed of small-town information, that Eliza Harroway's work was worth the walk to her cabin. Both women had come with careful, apologetic manner, as if they expected her to turn them away. She hadn't turned them away. She had given them honest prices and honest timelines, and had shaken hands with both. Business was a thing that could be built. She had understood since she was 19, if you built it from the ground up and didn't apologize for wanting it to grow. Wade came on the following Friday afternoon. He knocked at the door. She hadn't expected that, had expected the kind of man who would appear at the cabin and announce himself by sound rather than courtesy, and when she opened it, he was holding his hat in both hands. She showed him the shirt. He examined it without theater. He turned it, checked the seams, tried the buttons, looked at the shoulder construction for a long time. "This will work," he said. "It'll do more than work." Yes, he was still looking at the shoulder seam. "Yes, it will." He put it down. "I want 12 of these to start. I have your men's measurements from the list you sent. It'll be 3 weeks. That's fine." Then she said, "You sent me charcoal wool." He met her eyes. "I did. I didn't quote for anything made from that." "No," he agreed. "I was hoping you might make something for yourself. With the remainder from the other orders." He said it plainly, without flourish, the way he seemed to say most things. "It seemed like a different kind of work might suit you." Eliza looked at him. "That's charity," she said. "It's fabric I've already paid for." "It's charity shaped like business," she said, "and I can see the shape of it." Wade was quiet for a moment. He looked neither embarrassed nor defensive. "You're right," he said. "I thought it might please you. I didn't think it through. I'll tell you when something pleases me." She picked up the wrapped wool and held it out to him. "Take it back." He took it. She held the door. He left. And she watched him walk back down toward the road and thought about what it meant that he had taken the correction without argument, without wounded pride, without a single word about his good intentions. Most men, she had found, made their good intentions into a debt you were supposed to spend considerable time repaying. Wade Colter had simply put the fabric under his arm and said, "Good night." By August, the arrangement had settled into something that was recognizable as a working relationship, which is different from a friendship and more durable than most people give it credit for. She delivered orders. He paid promptly. His men, the ones who came to collect, rotating in no particular pattern, were respectful in a way that suggested he had said something to them about it, though she never asked and he never mentioned it. She had stopped the Langford women from occupying much of her thinking by the simple expedient of giving her thinking too many other things to occupy it. There were shirts to make, household accounts to fill, and now 3 ranch wives from the broader valley who had come to her with projects their usual dressmaker in Cheyenne either couldn't or wouldn't take on. A woman who needed clothes for a body that didn't fit standard patterns, a widow who wanted her late husband's shirts remade into practical items she could actually use, a rancher's wife who was pregnant and needed clothing that would see her through the next 6 months and then beyond. Eliza made all of it. She made it without complaint and without the apology that some dressmakers inserted into the work, as though the client should feel grateful for being accommodated at all. What she was building, she understood by the end of summer, was not just a set of accounts. It was a reputation, and reputation on the frontier was a form of property. You built it slowly, and once built, it held. Then, on the last day of August, a man she didn't know knocked on her door at 7 in the morning. He was well-dressed in the way of a man who wants you to notice that he is well-dressed. His suit was city-made, his boots were new, and he carried a leather document case that had the look of something purchased to impress rather than to be useful. He was perhaps 50, with a pleasant face and eyes that did not match the pleasantness of the face. "Miss Harroway," he said, smiling, "I'm Silas Vane. I represent several investment interests in the region, and I believe you and I have some business worth discussing." Eliza had been up since 5:30. She had her hair pinned and her apron on, and a seam ripper in her hand, because she had been in the middle of correcting someone else's poor construction on a collar. She looked at him. She looked at the document case. "What kind of business?" she said. "Land business," said Silas Vane. "Specifically your 10 acres here. I'd like to make you an offer." Something in Eliza's chest went very quiet and very alert at the same time. "My land isn't for sale," she said. Vane's smile didn't change. It was the smile of a man who had heard that sentence many times and had stopped finding it an obstacle. "Everything's for sale at the right price, Miss Harroway. That's just human nature. Not everything," she said. "And not this." She kept her hand on the doorframe. "What investment interests are you representing?" "Several," he said. "The particulars aren't important at this stage. They're important to me." The smile remained exactly as it was. "Of course. I'll have my office send you the formal documentation. In the meantime, I want you to know the figure I'm authorized to offer is considerably above the assessed value of the property. You could settle your mother comfortably in town. Have a proper shop front, perhaps. You're clearly talented. You shouldn't be working out of a cabin." "Mr. Vane," Eliza said, "my land isn't for sale. My cabin isn't for sale. The answer is no today, and it will be no when your documentation arrives, and I'd appreciate you not returning without an invitation." The smile shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something that was still polished and pleasant, but had a different quality underneath it. "I understand," he said. "These decisions take time. I'll leave you to think it over." "I won't be thinking it over. Good morning, Miss Harroway." He walked away down the road toward a horse tied at the fence line, and Eliza stood in her doorway and watched him go. And the feeling in her chest was not quite fear and not quite anger, but something that was the combination of the two that the body produces when it recognizes something it doesn't yet have words for. She went back inside and stood at her work table for a moment. Then she went to the cedar chest under her window and took out the deed to her property, the original, with the surveyor's stamp and the county clerk's signature, and she sat down with it at the table and read it through twice. Everything was in order. She put it back, but she remembered where it was. Wade arrived 2 days later with the next order request. He found her quieter than usual, and because he was the kind of man who noticed things he wasn't supposed to notice, he said, "Something's happened." "A land agent came," Eliza said, "a man named Silas Vane." She watched his face. Whatever she expected, dismissal, reassurance, the particular masculine reflex of telling a woman her worry was premature, she didn't get any of it. What she got was Wade Colter going very still. "Vane," he said. "It wasn't a question. You know him. I know of him." He set down the paper he'd been holding. "He's been acquiring land in 3 counties. Quietly. Small pieces. Most of the sellers didn't realize what they had until after they'd sold it." "What do they have?" Wade looked at her. "I don't know yet. But men like Vane don't go after 10-acre homesteads unless 10 acres fits into something larger." He paused. "What did you tell him?" "No. Clearly and more than once. Good. He picked the paper back up, then set it down again, like a man whose mind is somewhere ahead of his hands. Careful of what comes next. It won't be another polite visit. Eliza looked at him. What will it be, paperwork, he said. That's how they do it. Not threats. Paperwork. Boundary disputes, survey errors, deed challenges. Things that require lawyers and time and money that small landowners don't have. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then I need to make sure my paperwork is better than his, she said. Wade looked at her with that same quality of attention he had given her in the store, the kind that was actually trying to understand something, rather than simply move past it. Yes, he said. That's exactly right. He didn't offer to handle it for her. She didn't wait for him to. She had already started. Paperwork arrived on a Wednesday. Eliza had been expecting it. Wade had told her to expect it, and she had spent the 2 weeks since his warning organizing everything she owned that had a signature or a seal on it, the original deed, the surveyor's certificate from 1,879, county tax receipts she had paid every year without exception, and the 2 letters from the previous county assessor, cuts confirming the eastern boundary of her property along the creek bank. She had copies made at the land office in town, paid for out of her sewing money, and she kept the originals in the cedar chest and the copies in a flat tin box that she stored under the floorboard beneath her work table. She was not by nature a fearful woman, but she was a prepared one. The document that arrived by county messenger was 12 pages long, dense with legal language, and it alleged that the eastern boundary of Eliza Harroway's 10-acre homestead had been incorrectly surveyed in 1,879, and that the true boundary line, as determined by a resurvey conducted in August 1886, on behalf of the Vane Land and Development Company, placed approximately 3.5 acres of her creekside property outside her legal title. 3.5 acres. The creek acres. The ones where her garden ran, where she collected water twice daily, where the soil was dark and soft, and nothing like the harder ground closer to the cabin. She read the document once. Then she read it again more slowly. Then she put it flat on the table and pressed both palms against it and stared at it for a long moment, not because she didn't understand it, but because she needed a second to feel the full weight of what it was before she decided how to respond to it. Her mother came in from the back room, saw her face, and said, "What is it?" "Vane," Eliza said. Mabel crossed the room and read over her daughter's shoulder. She read without speaking, which was how she read everything that mattered. When she finished, she straightened up. 3.5 acres, Mabel said. Creek acres. He wants the water. He wants everything, Eliza said. Creek is how he takes it. You lose the water, you lose the ability to work the land, you lose the reason to stay. Mabel was quiet for a moment. Her cough had been better. The last several days the tincture was doing its work, and she was standing with the careful, upright posture of a woman who had been sick and did not intend to show it any more than necessary. "What are you going to do?" she said. Eliza picked up the document. "First, I'm going to find out who did this resurvey and how they did it, and whether it holds up to the original. Then I'm going to find out what Vane wants the creek corridor for. And then," she said, folding the papers with precise, even creases, "I'm going to make sure this goes nowhere." Mabel looked at her daughter. "You sound certain." "I'm not certain of anything," Eliza said, "but I'm not going to act uncertain. There's a difference." She rode to town the next morning, on the horse she borrowed from the Pierce family, whenever she needed it, a big, slow gray gelding named Fletcher, who was reliable in the way of things that have no ambition in any direction. She tied him at the post outside the county land office and went in before the clerk had fully opened for the day. The land office was run by a man named Clement Dray, who was 45 and had held the position for 11 years, and who knew every piece of property in the county the way a good shopkeeper knows his inventory, not because he loved it, but because it was his job and he was conscientious about it. He was not a brave man, but he was an accurate one, and accuracy, Eliza had always thought, was underrated as a form of courage. "Miss Harroway," he said, looking up from his desk with mild surprise. Most people did not arrive at the land office before 8 in the morning with a folded document in their hand and an expression like hers. She put the boundary challenge on his desk. He read it. His expression didn't change dramatically. He was a man who had learned to keep his face professional, but something around his eyes shifted. Vane Land and Development, he said. Yes. I'd like to see the original survey from 1879. The one that established my eastern boundary. Of course, he went to the filing cabinets along the back wall. He knew exactly which drawer without looking it up, which confirmed what she thought about him. He pulled a large folded document and spread it on the counter between them. Eliza looked at it. She was not a surveyor, but she had looked at land documents carefully since she was 22 and had filed her original homestead claim. And she had made it her business, since Wade's warning, to understand exactly what she was looking at when she looked at one. The eastern boundary was drawn clearly. Creek bank. The notation was specific, following the natural course of the upper tributary, eastern margin, to a distance of 40 chains from the northwestern corner stake. And this resurvey they're claiming, Eliza said. Has it been filed? Dre's face did something complicated. It was filed last week, he said. By the Vane Company. On whose authority? The filing was presented as a correction to a survey error. He paused. Processed it. He stopped. I processed it as submitted. Eliza looked at him. Mr. Dre, she said carefully. Did you compare it to the original before you processed it? He was quiet for a moment that was slightly too long. The submission was notarized and included the signature of a licensed surveyor, he said. Procedure. Did you compare it to the original? She said again. He looked down at the two documents side by side on the counter. No, he said. I did not. She let that sit for a moment. Not to punish him, just to let it be what it was. I'd like copies of both, she said. The original and the challenged version. And I'd like to know the name of the surveyor who signed the Vane document. He gave her all three things, and when she left, he was still standing at the counter looking at the two surveys side by side, with the expression of a man who has just realized that a thing he processed without thinking may have mattered considerably more than he thought. She went to Wade that afternoon. She didn't go because she needed him to solve it. She went because he had told her he knew something about Vane, and she had information now, and she wanted to compare it against whatever he had. He was in the yard near the main barn when she arrived, talking with two of his men about something involving the fence line on the north pasture. He dismissed them when he saw her face not rudely, just directly, with the efficiency of a man who had learned that some conversations needed to happen without an audience. She showed him what she had, the original survey, the challenge document, the surveyor's name. He read both documents. He read them carefully, which she appreciated. Harlan Fitch, he said, reading the name on the Vane survey. You know him? I know he lost his surveying license in Nebraska 3 years ago and apparently relocated to Wyoming. He looked up. Where did you hear this name before today? I didn't. He's new to me. He won't be the only one. Wade set the documents down on the fence rail between them. This is how Vane operates. He doesn't come at you directly. He manufactures a document problem, files it through proper channels so it looks legitimate, then offers to resolve this dispute by purchasing the property. Can't fight the paperwork fast enough, you either sell or you lose in a county, hearing to someone who has better lawyers than you do. Eliza looked at the documents. He's done this before. In at least 2 other counties that I know of. He paused. There's a family named Gruber on the South Road, and the alderman widow on the Western Tract. Both had boundary challenges filed against them in the last 6 months. Both sold within 2 months of the filing. What did they have that he wanted? I don't know yet. I've been trying to piece it together. He looked at the creek notation on her original survey. But you've got water, and Gruber's land runs along the same tributary 20 miles south. And the Alderman Tract, he stopped. What? The Alderman Tract runs along the same line, he said. He was looking at her with the expression of someone whose thoughts are moving faster than his words. East to west. Your creek, Gruber's south pasture, the Alderman western boundary. If you put a line on a map through all 3 properties. Corridor, Eliza said. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. For what? Railroad spur, he said. There's been talk for 2 years about a branch line coming through the valley. Nobody knew the route. Nobody official has said anything. He picked up her documents and looked at them again. But somebody knows the route. Eliza stood very still with the weight of that settling into place. 3.5 acres, not 3.5 acres of her land specifically. 3.5 acres that connected to a corridor, that connected to a railroad line, that connected to money that she could not begin to calculate, and that Silas Vane had been calculating for years. How many properties, she said. Along the corridor? He thought about it. I don't know for certain. If the line runs the length I think it does, possibly 20, maybe more. And how many of them know what they're actually sitting on? Probably none of them. She picked up her documents and squared them together carefully. I need a lawyer, she said. I need to know which lawyers in this county don't have any relationship with Vane's interests, she said. That's what I need from you. He looked at her for a moment. There's a man in Larkspur, Howard Fenn. He's good and he's independent. Older, been around long enough to know where the money in this county goes. He paused. He's not cheap. How much is my land worth to Silas Vane? Eliza said. Wade didn't answer that, because she hadn't asked it as a question. She folded her documents, put them in her bag, and said, Stand beside me in this, Wade. Not in front. He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, something between the two. Understood, he said. Howard Fenn was 61 years old and had the particular quality of a man who had stopped being impressed by other men's money sometime in his 40s and had never picked the habit back up. His office in Larkspur smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, and his desk was covered in a way that looked disordered, until you watched him reach for something without looking and find it immediately. He read the 2 surveys. He read the boundary challenge. He asked Eliza 3 questions, the third of which was, Who referred you to me? Wade Colter. Fenn made a sound that might have been approval. Good man. Stubborn in the right direction. He sets the documents down. You understand what you're up against. I'm beginning to. Vane's surveyor is not licensed in Wyoming. I can challenge the filing on that basis alone, which will buy you time. But Vane will simply file a corrected version with a licensed surveyor, and then you're in the same position with a cleaner document against you. He folded his hands. What you need is to make this case bigger than your 10 acres, so that the county can't quietly settle it on Vane's terms. There are other families, Eliza said. At least 2 I know of. More than 2, if my understanding of Vane's history is accurate. He looked at her. You'd need to bring them in. Get their deeds, their original surveys, any correspondence they received. Build a pattern that a commissioner can't ignore as a simple boundary dispute. What if they're afraid to come forward? Then you build what you can from the documents alone, he said. Court records, filed surveys, property transfer records. Pattern can speak without witnesses if you have enough pieces of it. He paused. It's more work. I'm not afraid of work, Eliza said. He looked at her over the rim of his glasses, with the specific expression of a man who is assessing a person and finding them better than expected. No, he said. I don't imagine you are, he quoted his fee. It was significant. She agreed to it without flinching, which she managed by reminding herself, internally, of what 3.5 acres of creekland was worth to a railroad company. She started with the Grubers. Martin Gruber was 58, stout, with the perpetual, slightly baffled expression of a man whom events have consistently surprised in the worst possible ways. His wife, Rosie, was sharper. She was the one who had kept the paperwork, who had copied everything before they signed the sale agreement with Vane's agent, who had done it on instinct. The way women who've learned to distrust smooth-talking men often do things on instinct. They lived now in a rented house on the edge of Copper Ridge. Martin had taken work at the lumber yard. He was not bitter, exactly, but he had the defeated quality of a man who had sold something he didn't fully understand and was beginning to understand it now. Eliza sat at their kitchen table and explained what she knew. Martin was quiet for a long time after she finished. Railroad, he said. It was barely a word. It was more like a sound that the word made when all the air went out of it. That's what I believe, Eliza said. We sold for $400, Rosie said. Her voice was very controlled. The assessed value was $380. Vane's agent said we were getting above market. You were getting above the assessed value, Eliza said. You were getting a fraction of what Vane will collect, when that corridor sells to the railroad company. Martin put both hands on the table in front of him, flat, the way a man does when he is trying to keep the table from floating away. What can we do? Rosie said. Possibly nothing, if the sale was legal and the papers were properly signed, Eliza said honestly. But if Vane used a fraudulent survey or misrepresented the purpose of the purchase to get you to sign, there may be a basis to challenge it. She looked at Rosie. You said you kept copies. Everything, Rosie said. She was already standing, moving toward the back room. She came back with a tin box not unlike the one Eliza kept under her own floorboard, and she set it on the table and opened it, and inside were copies of every document, every letter, every receipt from the entire transaction, organized by date in a way that made Eliza feel a wave of something that was very close to affection for a woman she barely knew. I didn't know why I was keeping them, Rosie said. I just knew I should. You were right, Eliza said. The alderman widow's name was Frances. She was 64 years old and had sold her western tract 9 weeks ago. She lived alone now in the house at the center of her remaining property, which was the house lot and the barn, and about 40 acres of grazing land that Vane apparently had no use for. Her hand shook slightly when she poured coffee, and she had the particular loneliness of a woman who had sold the piece of land her husband had loved most, and was still not sure how to live with having done it. He sent a very nice man, Frances said. Well-spoken. Very polite. She looked out her window. He told me the survey error had created a liability situation and that I might be responsible for legal costs if I didn't resolve it quickly. I don't have money for legal costs. I have the pension from the county and what I make from the chickens. He frightened you into selling, Eliza said. Frances stopped. He made me believe I had no choice. You may have had a choice, Eliza said. And the way he took it from you may matter legally. She paused. Can I ask, did you keep any of the paperwork? Frances looked at the table. I have the sale agreement. And the letter they sent about the survey error. She got up slowly and went to a drawer in the kitchen dresser and came back with 2 folded papers. Eliza read both of them. The letter about the survey error was, she noted, unsigned. It had a letterhead Vane Land and Development Company, but no individual signature and no notarization. This letter, Eliza said. Did anyone explain to you why it wasn't signed? Frances looked at it. I didn't notice, she said quietly. That's all right, Eliza said, though internally she was noting it carefully. An unsigned threat letter. A frightened widow. A fast sale. You noticed enough. You kept it. Frances looked at her across the table. She was a small woman with careful eyes, and she had the look of someone who has been carrying something for weeks and is just now considering setting it down. What do you want me to do? She said. Right now? Nothing except let me share these documents with my lawyer. There's a case to be made that coercion was involved in your sale. He'll tell us. She folded the papers back and slid them across. Keep those safe. And if anyone from Vane's company contacts you again, you write down exactly what they say and when they said it. Frances nodded slowly. Are you going to fight him? Yes, Eliza said. He has a lot of money. I know. And lawyers. I know that too. Frances looked at her. Why aren't you afraid? Eliza considered the question. It was honest, and it deserved an honest answer. I am afraid, she said. But I'm also angry, and the angry part is louder right now. She picked up her bag. Fear is useful when it makes you careful. It's only a problem when it makes you quiet. Frances was quiet for a moment after that. Then she said, I have a neighbor, the Pell family, 2 miles east. They had papers delivered last month, too, same kind. Eliza stopped at the door. Which direction? She said. Pells were still on their land. Thomas Pell was 32, his wife Clara was 29, and they had 2 children under 5, and the specific determination of young people who have not yet learned that determination sometimes isn't enough. They had received a boundary challenge 3 weeks ago and had done nothing with it because they didn't know what to do and couldn't afford to find out. Thomas read the boundary challenge document like a man who is seeing something in writing that he already suspected but was hoping wasn't real. We have 12 acres here, he said. 6 of it alongside the same creek as yours? Yes, Eliza said. Different section of the tributary, but the same corridor. If he gets our creek acres, he stopped. Your irrigation for the south field, Clara said quietly. She had one hand on her husband's arm without looking at him, the automatic way of people who have been anxious about the same thing together for some time. "We can't lose the South Field," Thomas said. "That's our—" He stopped again. "I know," Eliza said. "That's exactly why he wants it." Told them what she'd told the Grubers and Francis Alderman. She told them about the corridor, about the railroad, about what she and Howard Fenn were building. She told them that she couldn't promise the outcome, but that she could promise that she was not going to stop, and that if they were willing to share their documents with Fenn, it would strengthen the case for everyone. Thomas and Clara looked at each other across the table. It was a short look, the kind between people who have already talked about something so many times that the look replaces most of the words. "What do we do?" Thomas said. "Keep your deeds somewhere other than the obvious place," Eliza said. "Don't answer any correspondence from Vane without running it by Fenn first." And she hesitated. "If anyone comes to the property and says anything that frightens you, write it down immediately and send word to me." "Why do you?" Thomas said. "Because I'm the one keeping the record," Eliza said. She rode back to Copper Ridge in the late afternoon, with the gray light coming in sideways across the valley floor. And she was tired in the bone-deep way that comes not from physical work, but from talking to frightened people, and needing to keep your own fear out of your voice while you do it. She had names now. She had documents. She had, from the Grubers and the Pells and Francis Alderman, the beginning of a pattern that was visible if you knew to look for it. What she did not have yet was the thing she actually needed, which was proof that the surveys Vane's company had filed were not simply wrong. Surveys could be wrong by accident, but deliberately falsified. An unlicensed surveyor was a procedural problem. A forged boundary was a crime. She found Wade at the feed store, completing an order, and she waited outside and told him what she'd found when he came out. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without filling in the silence before she finished. 19 properties, she said. If the corridor runs the length we think, it could be as many as 19 families. That's what I've been counting, he said. You've been counting. I've been asking around, he said carefully, quietly. She looked at him. And? Harlan Fitch, the unlicensed surveyor on your challenge, I found out. He also signed 2 of the surveys that were used in the sales to Gruber and Alderman. He paused. Same notary on all 3. That's the same man certifying fraudulent documents. Yes. Who's the notary? He said a name she didn't recognize and then said, he works out of a private office on the south side of Cheyenne. He's notarized 43 documents for Vane's company in the last 2 years. Eliza stopped walking. 43. She turned to look at Wade fully. How do you know that? She said. I asked someone at the state records office to pull all filings by Vane Land and Development. He looked at her steadily. I did it on my own time, and without telling you, because I thought you might tell me not to. She looked at him for a long moment. I would have told you not to, she said. I know, because that's my information to gather. It is, and I'm giving it to you. He reached into his coat and produced 3 folded pages covered in figures and dates. Every Vane filing in 2 years, every notarization, every surveyor's name, it's yours. She took the pages. She looked at them, and then she looked at him. Wade, she said. Don't thank me. I was going to say next time, ask me first. He was quiet for a moment. You would have said no. Probably, she said. But it's my no to give. That's the point. He held her gaze. Understood, he said. For the second time. She folded the pages and put them in her bag, alongside everything else she was carrying. Around them, Copper Ridge moved in its ordinary late afternoon way wagons on the main street. A dog sleeping in a patch of sun near the hardware store. 2 women talking outside the seamstress supply. The ordinary surface of a town that didn't know yet what was underneath it. But Vane knew she was building something. She was sure of that. A man like that did not file fraudulent documents and then stop watching what happened next. The retaliation when it came was not going to look like the polite visit on her porch or even the formal boundary challenge. She had 3 weeks, maybe 4, before he moved harder. She intended to use every day of them. She had given herself 3 weeks. Vane gave her 10 days. The first sign came on a Monday morning, when she walked out to the garden at first light and found her eastern boundary marker, a cedar post. She had set herself 7 years ago and confirmed against the original survey pulled from the ground and left lying in the grass 6 feet from its hole, as though someone wanted her to know it had been moved deliberately rather than fallen by accident. She stood over it for a long moment. The ground around the hole was scuffed, but not muddy. It had been done sometime in the last 2 days, after the rain. More than one person. The post was heavy enough that a single man pulling it alone would have left different marks in the soil. She carried it back inside without replacing it. She was not going to replace it. Not yet. She was going to document where it had been, where it was found, and the exact condition of the ground around the hole, and she was going to add that documentation to the file she was building for Howard Fenn. She got her measuring tape and a piece of paper and a pencil and went back outside and wrote down every measurement she could take. And she drew a rough diagram of the hole and the post's position relative to the creek bank and the nearest standing tree, and she dated it and signed it and folded it and put it in the tin box under the floorboard. Then she went inside and made coffee and sat at her work table with the collar she was supposed to be finishing for Clara Pell's order. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this. She thought about it for a moment and decided it was not courage, exactly. It was more that the anger had reached a temperature where it burned clean rather than hot, and at that temperature you could work with it. The second sign came 3 days later, when Margaret Hoole arrived at her door. Margaret was one of Eliza's regular sewing customers, a miller's wife, practical and pleasant, who had been sending her household mending to Eliza for 2 years with the kind of quiet, consistent loyalty that Eliza valued more than enthusiasm. She came now with an expression that mixed embarrassment and something like relief, as though she had been arguing with herself about coming at all, and the part that won was not the comfortable part. "I have to tell you something," Margaret said before she was fully through the door. "Come in," Eliza said. Margaret sat at the table and folded and unfolded her hands twice, which was 2 times more than a woman like her usually needed before speaking. "Arthur got a visit," she said. Arthur was her husband. 2 days ago. A man from Vane's company. She stopped. He was very polite about it. That was the part that bothered Arthur most. Very polite. She looked up. He said that families doing business with you might find themselves on the wrong side of certain land matters that are currently under review. He didn't say it as a threat. He said it the way you'd say the weather might turn, like it was just information, and you could do with it what you wanted. Eliza kept her face still. "He said that?" she said. Arthur wrote it down afterward because it scared him. Margaret reached into her apron pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the table. "He wanted me to bring you the note, but he asked me to tell you he's sorry. He's going to have to stop sending work for a while, until this is settled." Eliza looked at the paper. She didn't pick it up immediately. "I understand," she said. "It's not that we don't believe you're right," Margaret said. The embarrassment was fully in her voice now, thick and uncomfortable. "It's that we have 3 children, and the mill lease is up for renewal in spring, and we can't. Arthur just can't." "Margaret," Eliza said quietly and without anger. "I'm sorry," Margaret said. "I'm truly sorry." "I know you are." Eliza picked up the paper and looked at Arthur's note. He had written it in small, careful handwriting, the date, the man's name, which was given as Caldwell but was probably not his real name, and the exact phrasing of the implied threat. "Thank you for telling me, and thank Arthur for writing this down. It matters more than you know." Margaret left with the relief of a person who has done the uncomfortable thing and found it slightly less terrible than anticipated. Eliza sat with Arthur Hoole's note for a long time. Vane was moving faster than she had expected, and in a direction she had not fully prepared for. He wasn't coming at her property again, not yet. He was cutting off her income. He was applying pressure to the people around her, systematically, through exactly the kind of polite, unverifiable visit that left nothing in writing except what Arthur Hoole had been careful enough to record. She had 17 active sewing accounts in and around Copper Ridge. She wondered how many of them had received a similar visit. By Friday, she knew it was 5. 5 families had either sent word that they were pausing their accounts or simply stopped responding to her messages about pending orders. 2 of them she heard about through others. They hadn't come to tell her directly. which she understood, even if she didn't find it comfortable. She laid the situation out for her mother that evening without decorating it. 5 accounts, Mabel said. So far. How much of the income does that represent? About a third, Eliza said. More if the larger orders don't come through. Mabel was quiet for a moment. She was sitting in the good chair by the window, the one that had been her husband's, with a mending basket in her lap that she had insisted on working from, despite Eliza's preference that she rest. What about the broken spur work? That's continuing. Wade hasn't said otherwise, and I haven't asked. You should ask. I'll know if it stops, Eliza said, and it won't. You're certain? Eliza considered the question. She thought about Wade reading those surveys with the same attention he gave to fence lines and water rights, the attention of someone who understood that land was not abstract. She thought about the way he had said understood twice, both times meaning it. Yes, she said. Mabel made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, the sound of a mother who is choosing to trust her daughter's judgment while reserving a private opinion. What are you going to do about the income? Mabel said. Work more. Eliza picked up the shirt in her lap. The broken spur order is enough to cover medicine and food. The case is what I have to protect. You can't work more and build a legal case at the same time. I don't have a choice about either one, so I'm doing both. Mabel looked at her daughter. It was the long, specific look that mothers give when they see something in their children they recognize and find painful because it came from them. You sound like your father, she said. He didn't lose the land, Eliza said. No, Mabel said. He didn't. She went to Fenn the following Tuesday with everything she had, the moved boundary marker documentation. Arthur Hoole's note, the names of the 5 accounts that had gone quiet, and the 3 pages of state records that Wade had gathered on Vane's filings. Fenn read through it all with the systematic attention of a man who has spent 40 years deciding what is useful and what is noise. The note from Hoole is good, he said. Indirect but good. It establishes a pattern of intimidation. He set it aside. The boundary marker removal is better. That tampering, if we can show it was intentional, which the ground evidence suggests. I drew a diagram and took measurements the morning I found it. He looked at her over his glasses. You did. I knew you'd need it. Yes, he said, I would have. He put the diagram with the note. Now, these state filings. He spread Wade's pages on the desk and spent several minutes going through them in silence. 43 documents. 1 notary. 2 surveyors, one of them unlicensed. He tapped the pages. This is the spine of it. If we can show that these documents were coordinated, not just similar errors, but the same people producing the same kinds of errors repeatedly for the same company, then we're not arguing about your boundary. We're arguing about a systematic scheme, which is what it is, Eliza said. Which is what it appears to be, Fenn said carefully. What it is will be established by the commissioner. When is the hearing? Vane's attorneys have for an early county hearing. They want it in 3 weeks. He looked at her without softening what came next. Faster than I'd like. We're not fully ready. Can you push back the date? I can try. But a delay request may not be granted, and if it isn't, appearing to delay may not help our position. He folded his hands on the desk. I want you to prepare for the possibility that we go into this hearing with what we have rather than what we need. Eliza sat with that. What do we need that we don't have, she said. Witnesses, he said. The Grubers, the Pells, Francis Alderman, their testimony about the process they went through, the pressure they felt, the representations made to them. Documents are strong. Documents with human testimony behind them are considerably stronger. He paused. And I'd like to know if there are others along that corridor who received challenges and haven't been identified yet. I've found 4 properties besides mine, she said. If there are 19, then there are 15 we haven't spoken to. I'll find them, Eliza said. You have 3 weeks, Fenn said. I know. She was already thinking about the route she would ride. She found 8 more families in the next 12 days. She rode Fletcher along the creek line north and south, stopping at every property with a creek-adjacent boundary, asking to see deed documents, explaining in plain language what she had found and what it meant. Some of them knew about the boundary challenges already. Others had received notice and hadn't understood what it was. Two had already been approached by Vane's agent and were in the early stages of negotiating a sale they didn't want to make. Not all of them were willing to join her. A man named Decker Broad, red-faced, with the immovable quality of someone who has decided that the safest course is the shortest one, listened to everything she said and then said, "Even if you're right, the county commissioner is not going to rule against Silas Vane." "Why not?" Eliza said. "Because Vane's lawyer plays cards with the commissioner every other Friday. Because Vane's company has an account at the Copper Ridge Savings and Loan that Gerald Langford doesn't want to see closed." Because he stopped. "Because that's how things work here." "That's how things have worked here," Eliza said. "That's not the same as how things work." Decker looked at her. She was a woman he had never spoken with before today, sitting at his kitchen table with a collection of documents he hadn't known existed, telling him that the people running the county might be more crooked than he'd allowed himself to believe. "You're not from money," he said. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact that he seemed to consider relevant. "No," she said. "You don't have lawyers on retainer." "I have Howard Fenn." That seemed to give him something to chew on. "Fenn's a good man," he said. "I know." He was quiet for a long moment. His wife, sitting at the far end of the table and silent throughout, was watching him with an expression that was patient, in a way that held an opinion inside the patience. "What do you need from me?" he said finally. "Your original deed. Your survey. Any correspondence you've received from Vane or his company. And if you're willing, your testimony at the hearing." "Testimony, yes." He looked at his wife. She said, "Tell her yes, Martin." He looked back at Eliza. "Yes," he said. She was on the road back from the Decker property when she passed the Copper Ridge Bank. She would not have thought anything of it. She passed the bank regularly. It was on the main road, except that as she went by, she saw Gerald Langford and another man she didn't recognize standing on the side porch, talking in the low, deliberate manner of people who are conducting business they'd prefer not to conduct through the front door. The other man was well-dressed and held a leather document case. Eliza recognized the document case. She had seen it on the first morning. On her porch, Silas Vane. She did not slow down. She did not look directly at them. She rode past at the same pace she'd been maintaining, with her face turned slightly forward, and she filed it away with the same careful attention she gave to everything that seemed like it might matter later. Gerald Langford and Silas Vane, conducting business on the side porch of the bank rather than inside it. She went to Fenn the next morning and told him. He was quiet for a moment. "Langford," he said. "Yes. Gerald Langford is on the board of the County Road Commission," he said slowly. "The Road Commission has a standing agreement with the County Commissioner's Office on infrastructure decisions." Eliza looked at him, "Which includes decisions about railroad right-of-way." "Yes," Fenn said, "it does." They sat with that for a moment. "How deep does this go?" Eliza said. "I don't know," Fenn said. "But if Langford is involved in the financing, if the Copper Ridge Savings and Loan has money in Vane's railroad scheme, then we're not just fighting a land speculator. We're fighting money that has already bought itself a seat at several tables." "Is that better or worse for us?" Eliza said. "Both," Fenn said. "Worse, because the resistance will be more organized and better resourced. Better, because a scheme this wide is harder to hide. More people know about it. More people have reason to be afraid when it falls apart." He looked at her. "And things this size do fall apart when enough pressure is applied in the right places." "What are the right places?" Eliza said. "The investors," he said. "Not Vane. Not Langford. The men actually financing the railroad extension. They are not, I would wager, local men. They are men in Chicago or Denver or St. Louis who have put money into a project based on representations made to them about the legality and status of the land corridor." He leaned forward slightly. "If those men receive credible information suggesting the corridor has been assembled through fraud, they will not wait for a county court ruling. They will freeze their money until the matter is resolved, because they cannot afford the legal exposure." "And if they freeze their money," Eliza said, following it. "Vane's operation stops," Fenn said. "He can't continue acquiring properties if he has no capital and no promise of capital. And more importantly, the county commissioner cannot quietly resolve the hearing in Vane's favor if the investors are already aware that the land titles are in dispute." Eliza sat back. How do we reach the investors? She said. That, Fenn said, requires someone with the right kind of credibility. He looked at her steadily. A credible rancher with standing in the regional cattle industry, for example, who has business connections in Denver or Cheyenne, might be positioned to raise concerns through channels that would get them taken seriously. Eliza said, I'll ask Wade. That would be my suggestion. She asked Wade that evening, sitting on the porch of the Broken Spur in the cooling air. She had ridden straight there from Fenn's office, and she had told him everything, from the Langford sighting to Fenn's reasoning about the investors. In the same plain, sequential way, she told him everything, not because she needed his reaction, but because she had found, over these weeks, that telling him things helped her hear them more clearly herself. He listened. He looked out at the pasture while she talked, with the settled, attentive quality she had come to depend on more than she intended to. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Denver, he said. I know 2 men in Denver who have railroad money. We've done business on cattle drives for years. He paused. I don't know if they're specifically in this project. Can you find out without tipping Vane that we're asking? I can write a letter framed as a business inquiry. Something that opens a conversation without showing the full hand. He looked at her. It's not guaranteed. I know. And it takes time. How much time? 2 weeks for letters to travel and come back. Maybe 3. The hearing is in just under 2 weeks. Then I need to send it tomorrow morning, he said. She nodded. He looked at her directly. Eliza, if the hearing goes badly. I know. If Vane's attorneys present their challenge and the commissioner rules in their favor. I know what happens, she said. I lose 3.5 acres, and then Vane files amended challenges on the other properties, and the whole corridor moves to him without a circuit court fight, because nobody has the money to take it that far. Yes, so the hearing cannot go badly. He looked at her. Can't control every outcome. I can control how prepared I am, she said, and how I walk into that room. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to make a new dress. Wade looked at her without quite understanding the shift. For the hearing, she said, I'm going to make something for myself. Something that fits the way I want to be seen. She paused, and she said it without vanity and without performance as a statement of intention, the way she made most statements. They're going to look at me and see what they expect to see. I want to give them something else to contend with. Wade was quiet. That's a good idea, he said. I know it is, she said. She rode home in the dark, and she was tired, and her back ached from 2 weeks of more riding than she was used to, and the fear that was underneath everything, the fear that Decker had named, without knowing he named it. Fear that the county commissioner played cards with Vane's lawyer every other Friday, was still there, still present, doing its quiet work at the base of everything else. But above it, and louder, was the other thing. The thing that had been with her since the morning she found her boundary marker lying in the grass like something discarded. She had thought, in those first years after her father died, and she and Mabel had kept the cabin and the land and the work by doing everything themselves and asking no one for anything, that the thing you were protecting when you fought was the land itself. The acres, the creek, the dark soil in the garden plot. But it wasn't the land. The land was what you stood on. What you were actually protecting was the right to stand. She got home at 9 o'clock, and her mother was already asleep, and she lit one lamp at her work table, and she took out the dark blue wool she had been setting aside, for 3 weeks bought with her own money, chosen for weight and durability, and a particular quality of color that she had wanted because it was what she wanted, not because it was sensible, and she began to cut. The dress took 4 days. She worked on it in the margins of everything else, the Broken Spur order, the remaining active accounts, the documents she was still organizing for Fenn. She worked on it the way you work on something that matters to you when you cannot afford to let it be the only thing that matters. Cut it for her own body, not for an idealized version of it. Not the version that Beatrice Langford had laughed at in the general store. The one that existed wide in the hips, strong across the shoulders, full in the body in all the ways that her body had always been full, and she cut the fabric to fit that body with the same precision she brought to everything she made, which was the precision of someone who has learned that the work either does what it's supposed to do or it doesn't, and no amount of hoping changes that. She finished it the night before the hearing. She hung it on the wall peg and looked at it in the lamplight for a long moment. It wasn't beautiful the way dresses in shop windows were beautiful, the kind of beauty that existed to be looked at. It was beautiful the way a well-built fence was beautiful, or the way a seam that would hold through hard use was beautiful, because the beauty was in the fact that it was exactly right for what it was supposed to do. Took it down and folded it carefully over the chair and went to sleep. The morning of the hearing, she arrived at the county courthouse 40 minutes early. She wore the blue dress. She carried Howard Fenn's case files in a flat leather bag she had borrowed from Mabel, and her own tin box of original documents, and she walked into the building with the specific, deliberate pace of someone who has decided that every detail of how she moves through a room is a choice. Courthouse filled quickly, more people than she had expected. Neighbors, ranchers, several of the families from along the corridor, the Pells, the Grubers, the Deckers, Francis Alderman in a dark coat sitting very straight in the second row. People who had heard about the hearing through the ordinary channels of a small town that talked about everything. And people who had come to see Silas Vane prevail, because they believed that was what was going to happen. And small towns also have a tendency to seat themselves near what they expect to win. Vane arrived with 2 lawyers. They wore city suits and carried more document cases than Fenn, and they moved with the practiced ease of men who appear in courtrooms regularly and know how to use space and posture to communicate confidence. The lead attorney was a man named Preston Gould. He was 50, silver-haired, with the smooth, frictionless manner of someone who had won a great many arguments by making the other side feel foolish for having an argument at all. He saw Eliza across the room. She saw him register her, assess her in the way that men like that assessed women like her: the size, the dress, the absence of a man standing directly beside her, and she saw him decide, in the space of that glance, that this was going to be straightforward. She held his gaze for exactly long enough to let him know she had seen the assessment. Then she turned back to Fenn. 3 witnesses confirmed, Fenn murmured. Gruber, Decker, Pell. Francis Alderman has agreed to provide a written statement if not called in person. Good, Eliza said. Gould is going to attack the unlicensed surveyor argument by claiming procedural correction, that the filing error has since been remedied with a new licensed surveyor's certification. Has it been? A certification was filed 4 days ago. Fenn looked at her. Which is interesting. Why? Because it was filed in a hurry. And hurried certifications tend to have errors. He opened his case. I've been through it 3 times. And the measurements on the new certification don't agree with the measurements on the original filing, he said. Not dramatically, but enough. She felt something shift in her chest, not relief, not yet, but something with relief shape. That's ours, she said. That's ours, Fenn agreed. The commissioner entered the room. The noise settled. Preston Gould rose from his table with the ease of a man taking his usual seat. Eliza straightened her back, felt the blue wool settle exactly where she had cut it to settle, and looked at the front of the room. She had 11 families behind her who had come to see this through. She had documents that told a story no single piece of them could tell alone. She had Howard Fenn, who was old and careful, and had stopped being impressed by money in his 40s, and had not started again. She was not going to collapse under questioning. Preston Gould was about to find that out. Commissioner's name was Harold Briggs, no relation to Tom at the general store, though both men shared a quality of preferring to keep their heads down when things got complicated. Harold Briggs was 62, had held the commissioner's seat for 9 years, and had the look of a man who had made a career of splitting differences and calling it judgment. He wore a good coat and kept his desk very neat, and had, in Eliza's estimation, the particular nervousness of someone who already knew more about this hearing than he was supposed to know. He called the room to order at 9 o'clock sharp. Preston Gould rose immediately, before the echo of the gavel had fully settled, with the practiced smoothness of a man who understood that the first voice in a room often set the room's tone. Commissioner Briggs, he said, the matter before you is straightforward. A surveying error was made in 1879, when Miss Harroway's homestead claim was filed. That error incorrectly placed the eastern boundary of the property at the creek bank, when the legally correct boundary, established by subsequent resurvey, falls approximately 40 yards west of that position. The Vane Land and Development Company has filed a corrected survey, certified by a licensed surveyor, and is simply asking this commission to recognize the accurate boundary. He said it the way you describe a math problem. Clean, simple, already solved. The opposing party, Gould continued, with a slight shift in tone that stopped just short of dismissal, has raised procedural objections regarding the initial filing. We will demonstrate that those objections have been addressed by the corrected certification and that the Commission has before it everything needed to resolve this matter today. He sat down. Fenn rose without hurry. Commissioner, he said, I'm Howard Fenn, representing Miss Eliza Harroway. Mr. Gould has described this as a straightforward matter. I'd like to show you why it is not. He did not look at Gould. He looked at the Commissioner, steadily, the way a man looks at something he needs to stay exactly where it is. The boundary challenge filed by the Vane Company in August of this year was based on a survey conducted by a man named Harlan Fitch. Mr. Fitch does not hold a surveying license in the state of Wyoming. He has not held one in any state since his Nebraska license was revoked in 1883. Fenn set a document on the table and moved a copy toward the Commissioner's desk. That filing was therefore legally deficient on its face. 4 days ago, the Vane Company filed a replacement certification from a licensed surveyor, a filing that was, I would note, produced in considerable haste. He paused. That haste has consequences, he said. The measurements in the new certification do not align with the measurements in the original Fitch survey. They differ by 11 feet on the northern stake and by 6 feet on the southern. These are not rounding errors. They represent a material inconsistency in the legal description of the claimed boundary. He set a second document down, which raises an obvious question, Fenn said. If the boundary is as clear as Mr. Gould suggests, why do two surveys filed by the same company, in support of the same claim, describe it differently? The room was very quiet. Commissioner Briggs looked at the documents. He looked at them with the expression of a man who had been hoping this would not become complicated, and was now understanding that it already was. Gould was on his feet. The discrepancy is a clerical matter resulting from differing measurement conventions and is fully explainable. Then, explain it now, Fenn said pleasantly. The appropriate time too. You said the matter was straightforward, Fenn said. I'm asking you to explain the inconsistency in the documents your client filed. If it's straightforward, it should take about 30 seconds. Gould's pleasant manner developed a slight pressure behind it, like a door someone was pushing against from the other side. Commissioner, he said, turning away from Fenn and toward Briggs, these technical details can be addressed through proper expert testimony at the appropriate. Mr. Fenn raises a fair point, Briggs said. He said it carefully, the way a man says something he's slightly surprised to hear himself say. He said it. Gould paused. Eliza, sitting beside Fenn, felt the weight of the room shift by a degree. Not dramatically. Not enough to mean anything yet. But enough to notice. Fenn called Martin Gruber first. Martin came to the witness chair with the careful, slightly stiff walk of a man who has rehearsed this and is determined not to forget his rehearsal. He sat with his hands on his knees and his jaw set, and he told his story without embellishment, the boundary challenge letter, the agent's visit, the representation that he had no practical choice but to sell, the price he received, which had seemed above market until he understood what market he had actually been selling in. Gould cross-examined with the precision of a surgeon. Were you explicitly told you had to sell? Did anyone threaten you directly? Did you consult a lawyer before signing? Martin answered honestly, no, not in those words. No, not explicitly. No, he couldn't afford one. So you made a voluntary decision, Gould said, based on information you had at the time, to sell your property at a price you found acceptable. I made a frightened decision, Martin said, based on information I was given that I now know wasn't complete. But you signed the agreement. Yes. No further questions. Martin stood up, and as he passed back to his seat, Rosie Gruber put her hand on his arm and held it there. Thomas Pell was next. He was younger than Martin and had less patience for Gould's framing, which made him slightly less controlled on the stand, and, Eliza thought, considerably more believable. When Gould suggested that receiving a boundary challenge didn't constitute coercion, Thomas leaned forward and said, "When a man shows up at your door and tells you that you might owe legal costs you can't pay for a survey error that he says is your fault, and then offers to resolve the whole thing by buying the land that's supposedly an error, that's coercion. You can call it paperwork if you want. I know what it felt like." There was a sound from the gallery, not quite applause, but its cousin. The sharp exhalation of a room that has heard something true. Briggs looked up, the room settled. Gould said, "That's your interpretation of the interaction." "Yes," Thomas said. "It's also the truth." Eliza went to the stand in the middle of the morning. She had been watching Gould work for 2 hours by then, and she understood his method fully. He was not trying to disprove her evidence. He was trying to make her seem like someone whose evidence wasn't worth serious attention, someone who had misunderstood, overreacted, constructed a conspiracy from what were actually routine land transactions and administrative errors. It was a technique that depended on the person on the stand, either becoming emotional or becoming uncertain, because both of those things served his purpose. She intended to be neither. Fenn led her through the evidence systematically. The original survey and its clear notation, the removed boundary marker and her measurements. The 3 pages of state records showing 43 vein filings through the same notary and the same pair of surveyors. The pattern of properties along a consistent geographic corridor. When he finished, she had laid 12 documents before the commission, and each one connected to the next the way the pieces of a fence connect not decoratively, but structurally, each one necessary to the whole. Then Gould rose. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the room that morning, with the assessment already complete. "Miss Harroway," he said, "you've characterized this as a widespread scheme. A corridor. A railroad conspiracy involving multiple parties across several counties." He paused. "You're a seamstress." The room was quiet. "Yes," she said. "I am. You have no background in land law, surveying, or railway development." "No. Your understanding of what you've called a corridor comes from documents gathered over the course of a few weeks, during which time you spoke to neighbors, borrowed a horse, and formed conclusions that you're now presenting to this commission as established fact." "I'm presenting documents," she said. "The documents contain the facts. I'm asking the commission to read them. The documents you selected," he said. "Documents that you, with no legal or technical training, decided were relevant." "Mr. Fenn selected them," she said, "with 50 years of legal experience." Gould shifted. "You have alleged that the Vein Land and Development Company engaged in systematic fraud. That's an extraordinary claim. It's supported by the documents," she said. "You've alleged that a county official and a prominent banker have improper relationships with Vane's business interests. I observed Gerald Langford meeting with Silas Vane on the side porch of the Copper Ridge Savings and Loan," she said. "I didn't allege a relationship. I reported an observation. And from that single observation you concluded." "I concluded nothing from that observation alone," she said. "I noted it. The documents I've submitted contain the conclusions." He looked at her steadily. She looked back at him steadily. This was the moment he had been building toward, the moment where she was supposed to feel the weight of the room's skepticism and become smaller under it. She did not become smaller. "Miss Harroway," he said, "with a slight change in approach, you've described your boundary marker as having been deliberately removed. Do you have any evidence identifying who removed it?" "No. So it may have fallen. It weighed 40 pounds and had been driven 2 feet into the ground," she said. It didn't fall. A sound from the gallery. Briggs looked up again, but this time with less of an impulse to quiet it. "You've alleged intimidation of your business customers," Gould said. "Your evidence for this is a note written by a man named Hoole describing a conversation he claims occurred. A conversation he documented immediately after it occurred," she said, "with the date, the name given by the visitor, and the specific language used. A name that cannot be verified. The language can be verified against the pattern of similar visits made to other property owners along the corridor." "The alleged corridor. The documented corridor," she said. documented by the filings of your client's company in the state records. Gould stopped. It was a brief stop. He recovered quickly, but it was a stop. Kind a man makes when he has pressed a door he expected to open and found it didn't move. Your client filed 43 documents in 2 years, Eliza said, and she said it not to Gould but toward the commissioner, because that was who needed to hear it. Those documents share the same notary, the same surveyors, and target properties that form a consistent geographic line. One of those surveyors is unlicensed. The other signed a replacement certification that doesn't agree with the original filing. She paused. If that's not a pattern, Commissioner, I'd like to know what word you'd use for it. Briggs looked at the documents on his desk. He didn't answer. Gould said, I have no further questions. He sat down, and Eliza stood up, and as she walked back to her seat, she was aware of the room in a way she hadn't fully been aware of it before. Not the sound, because there wasn't much sound, but the quality of the attention. The difference between a room watching a spectacle and a room watching something that matters. The afternoon session began with a recess that ran 40 minutes longer than Briggs had announced, which told Eliza something, though she wasn't sure yet exactly what. She and Fenn sat in the corridor on a bench outside the hearing room, and she ate the biscuit she had brought from home, and he drank coffee from a flask, and they didn't talk much because they had said what needed saying, and the rest was waiting. You did well, Fenn said after a while. Did I win, she said. You didn't lose, he said. Those aren't the same thing. What's the difference? Winning is a ruling in your favor. Not losing is making it impossible for him to give a ruling against you without it being visible as exactly what it is. He looked at the closed doors. Briggs is not a brave man, but he is not, I think, a corrupt one. He's a man who has taken the path of least resistance for 9 years and now finds that the path of least resistance has changed. Because of the documents. Because of everything, Fenn said. The documents, the witnesses, you on that stand. He paused. And the people in that room. You had neighbors in there who came because they wanted to see what was going to happen. By this afternoon, they were there because they'd decided which side they were on. Eliza looked at the floor. That matters to a commissioner, Fenn said. More than it probably should, but it matters. The doors opened. What happened next did not happen in the hearing room. It happened in the corridor, 10 minutes into the resumed session, when a man Eliza didn't recognize came through the side door of the building and handed a folded note to the bailiff, who brought it to Fenn at the table. Fenn read it. His face did something careful. He passed it to Eliza under the table. The note was from Clement Dre, the land office clerk. It said, in the slightly cramped handwriting of a man writing quickly, I need to speak with Mr. Fenn urgently. I have information about the original survey filing that I should have provided earlier. I am prepared to provide a sworn statement, C. Dre. Eliza read it twice. She passed it back to Fenn, and he looked at Briggs, who was reviewing documents at the commissioner's bench, and he said, Commissioner, I apologize for the interruption. I've just received a communication that may be materially relevant to this proceeding. I'd like to request a brief recess to evaluate it. Gould looked up sharply. Briggs said, How brief? 20 minutes, Fenn said. Briggs granted it. In the corridor, with Dre standing in front of them, with the look of a man who has been building to something for weeks and has finally decided to build it, the story came out. He had been visited 2 months ago by a man from Vane's company who had reviewed all of the pending land filings in the county and had identified 3 that he said needed to be administratively adjusted to reflect corrected survey data. He had been told that this was a routine correction process. He had been told the filings were all properly authorized. He had processed them. He had not compared them to the originals. I processed 3 filings that I didn't fully verify, he said. He was looking at the floor while he said it, because that was the only direction he could manage. One of them was Miss Harroway's boundary challenge. I, the man who came, was very matter-of-fact about it. He made it sound like paperwork. I made it sound like paperwork to myself. He looked up at Fenn. It wasn't paperwork. No, Fenn said, it wasn't. I'll give a sworn statement, Dre said. Whatever you need. He stopped. I should have been more careful. Eliza looked at him. He was a conscientious man who had made a choice in the direction of convenience rather than accuracy, and he had been carrying the weight of it for 2 months, and he had finally put it down by walking through a side door with a folded note. "Thank you, Mr. Dre," she said. He looked at her with something that was close to gratitude, which she hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," he said, "about all of it." "Tell the commissioner what you told us," she said. "That's enough." Dre's statement changed the architecture of the hearing. He gave it clearly, under Fenn's careful questioning, and the room was so quiet that Eliza could hear the sound of people breathing around her. Gould cross-examined vigorously, but Dre had said a simple thing: "I processed documents I should have scrutinized more carefully. And the man who brought them to me was working for the Bain Company, and that simple thing was not something cross-examination could undo, because it was true, and Dre was clearly not lying." When Dre stepped down, Gould requested a private consultation with Vane. The recess was granted. Eliza watched Vane and his attorneys retreat to the far corner of the room. She watched the conversation from across the space, the angles of the bodies, the quality of the silence, the moment when Vane's posture shifted from assured to contained in a way that was just barely visible if you were watching for it. She was watching for it. She looked at Fenn. He raised his eyebrows very slightly. She nodded. The consultation lasted 11 minutes. When Gould returned to the front of the room, he addressed Briggs directly, without looking at Fenn or at Eliza. "Commissioner," he said, "given the new information presented this afternoon, the Vane Land and Development Company is prepared to withdraw the boundary challenge against Miss Harroway's property, pending a full internal review of the survey process." "We are not conceding. The withdrawal is accepted," Briggs said. He said it quickly, in the way of a man releasing something he has been holding at arm's length. "We are not conceding any wrongdoing," Gould finished, with slightly less momentum than he'd started with. "Noted," Briggs said. "The boundary challenge is withdrawn. Miss Harroway's original property lines, as established by the 1,879 survey, are confirmed." He looked down at his papers, then up at the room. "Given the questions raised today regarding the filing process and the potential involvement of other properties in similar challenges, I am referring this matter to the Circuit Court for a full review of all Vane Land and Development filings in the county over the past 2 years. The room exhaled. Not cheering, it wasn't that kind of room, and this wasn't that kind of moment. It was the sound of people who had been holding something tightly for a long time, beginning, carefully, to let go. Eliza sat very still. She had kept her property. She had forced the referral. The Circuit Court would take months, and there were no guarantees about what it would find or how it would rule on the other properties. And the Grubers might still not get their land back, and Frances Alderman might still have sold something she couldn't recover. She knew all of that. But the boundary challenge was withdrawn. Her name was confirmed against her deed, and a circuit court was now going to open a file with the name Vane Land and Development Company on the cover and read everything inside it. That was not nothing. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon had gone long and golden, the particular late light of a Wyoming September that made everything look more resolved than it was. People came to her in ones and twos. The Pells, the Grubers, Rosie with her eyes bright in a way that was controlled but only just. Martin Decker, who shook her hand with both of his and didn't say much, which from him meant more than a speech would have. Frances Alderman, who took Eliza's hand and held it for a moment and then said, very quietly, "What happens to mine?" "The circuit court will look at your sale," Eliza said honestly. "If the coercion can be established, the unsigned letter, the pressure on the timeline, there may be a basis for recovery. I don't know for certain, but it's in the record now." Frances nodded. She was holding herself very carefully together. "That's more than I had this morning," she said. "Yes," Eliza said. "It is." She found Wade at the edge of the crowd, slightly back from it, which was where he usually was. He had come, she hadn't asked him to, but she hadn't been surprised to see him when she'd entered the building that morning. He didn't tell her he'd saved the day, because he hadn't. He had provided information and sent letters and stood where she'd asked him to stand. "The investors," she said. "Did you hear back this morning?" he said. Before the hearing.
"I didn't want to tell you before because I didn't know which direction it would go."
He looked at her steadily. "2 of the Denver men are in the railroad project. They received my letter 4 days ago. They've told their contacts here to freeze new transactions until the land titles can be confirmed clean. She looked at him. That's what this afternoon was about, she said slowly. Weigelt withdrew. Partly, he said. The clerk's testimony would have been enough on its own. But investors froze the money this morning. Vane knew the referral was coming regardless. The withdrawal let him control the shape of it. He's not done, she said. No. He'll restructure. Find another route, another corridor, another set of names to put on the paperwork. He paused. But not here. Not with this county's records now under circuit court review. She was quiet for a moment. You made those calls before you knew how the hearing would go, she said. Yes. Before you knew if it would matter. I knew it would matter to the people along that corridor regardless of what Briggs decided, Wade said. Vane needs capital. No capital, no scheme. That's true whether today went your way or not. She looked at him. She thought about what it meant, that he had done something substantive, behind the scenes, without waiting to see whether it would be credited. Thank you, she said. You did the work, he said. We both did, she said. It was the first time she'd said it that way. Something moved across his face, quiet, not performed. Yes, he said. We did. Around them, Copper Ridge was doing what small towns do after something larger than usual has happened, processing it in pieces, in small conversations. People collecting what they'd seen into something they carry home and talk about over supper. Beatrice Langford was standing near the courthouse steps with two women Eliza recognized. She saw Eliza. For a moment, she held the look, and then she was the first to turn away. Eliza noticed it. She filed it alongside everything else, not triumphantly, just as information. The kind of information that tells you where things stand. She was tired in a way that went to the center of her. Her feet ached. Her back ached. She had been building toward this afternoon for weeks, and the adrenaline that had held her upright through the hearing was now draining out of her in a slow, steady way that left behind mostly the awareness of how much she wanted to sit down somewhere quiet. But there was one more thing to do. She went to find Clement Dre. He was standing alone near the side door of the building, with the look of a man who has done the right thing and isn't sure yet what it has cost him. Mr. Dre, she said. He turned. His expression was braced. You did the right thing today, she said. Whatever comes from it, you did the right thing. He looked at her for a moment. I should have done it sooner, he said. Yes, she said, without softening it. But you did it. He nodded. It was a small nod, the kind that carries a large amount of something the person isn't quite ready to say out loud. She left him there and walked toward Fletcher, who was tied at the post at the end of the road and had spent the afternoon in the patient, ambitionless way he spent everything. She untied him, mounted, and sat for a moment looking at the town around her, the courthouse, the bank, the general store where Beatrice Langford had laughed, and where Wade had stood up from a table, and where Eliza had walked out the door with her medicine and her dignity, and the beginning of a working arrangement that had become something she didn't yet have a word for and wasn't in a hurry to name. She turned Fletcher toward home. The evening was coming in cool off the mountains, and the light was long across the valley, and she had land to go back to that still had her name on it, and her mother waiting in the cabin. And tomorrow, there would be orders to fill and documents to send to the circuit court, and probably a dozen things she hadn't thought of yet that would need thinking about. But tonight there was just the road and the cooling air and the particular feeling that comes not when you've won something completely, but when you've made it impossible for the wrong thing to happen quietly. That, she had found, was often enough. The circuit court took 4 months. Eliza had known it would take time. Fenn had told her from the beginning that the referral was not a resolution, it was the opening of a longer process, the kind measured in correspondence and continuances and the grinding patience of institutional procedure. She had accepted that. What she hadn't fully prepared for was the particular quality of those 4 months, the way ordinary life had to continue running alongside something that felt anything but ordinary. She filled orders, she repaired clothes, she rode Fletcher out to the Pells twice, and to Francis Alderman's place once a month. Not because there was new information to share, but because those people were waiting in their own particular ways, and waiting is easier when someone checks on you while you do it. She sent documents to Fenn when he requested them. She answered letters from the circuit court's administrative office. In the careful, factual language Fenn had coached her to use, no emotion, no interpretation, just the facts as they existed in the documents. Her 5 suspended accounts came back to her slowly and not all at once. Margaret Hoole was the first, arriving one afternoon in October with a basket of mending and an expression that was partly apology and partly the brisk practicality of someone who has decided to move forward without making a ceremony of looking back. "Arthur says to tell you he should have held his ground," Margaret said, setting the basket on the work table. "Tell Arthur I understand," Eliza said, "and tell him I'm glad he wrote things down. He said that note was the only useful thing he did." "It was useful," Eliza said. "That counts." 2 other accounts came back by November. The remaining 2 she didn't hear from, and she didn't pursue them. People made choices under pressure, and some of those choices changed the shape of a relationship permanently, and that was simply what it was. She had enough work. The Broken Spur order had expanded in October. Wade had added winter gear to the contract, heavier coats and reinforced work trousers, and the volume kept her hands occupied during the long evenings when the circuit court process was moving at its invisible, institutional pace, and there was nothing to do but wait for it. She and Wade had settled into a pattern that neither of them had designed exactly, the way most durable things settle not by plan but by accumulation. He came to supper most Tuesdays, at the cabin, with enough notice that it wasn't a surprise but enough casualness that it never felt like a formal arrangement. He talked about the ranch. She talked about the case, about orders, about her mother. Mabel sat at the table and contributed opinions on both topics without being asked, which was her general approach to conversation, and which Wade had adapted to with a speed that Eliza found quietly telling. One Tuesday in November, after supper, he sat across the table from her while she worked on the seam of a coat, and he said, "I heard from the Denver men again." She looked up. "The investors froze more than their local transactions," he said. "They've pulled out of the project entirely. Told their contacts here they want no part of a land corridor that's under circuit court review." She set the coat down. "That's the money. All of it, as far as I can tell." Vane had 2 other investment sources, but they were contingent on the Denver capital. Without it, the whole railroad scheme is. He paused, choosing the word carefully. "It's finished. Not wounded. Finished." Eliza sat with that for a moment. "The families who sold," she said. "Does that help them?" "Not directly," he said. "The restitution question still goes through the circuit court. But without Vane's company having active capital, the legal defense of those transactions gets weaker. He can't afford to fight every family who files a claim." She nodded slowly. "What happens to Vane?" she said. "I don't know exactly. His companies are frozen. His reputation in the investment community is it doesn't recover from something like this quickly, if it recovers at all." He looked at her. "He won't be building a railroad through this valley." "No," she said. "He won't." She picked the coat back up and found the seam and kept working, and the room was quiet in the way it was quiet on Tuesday evenings, a comfortable quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. The circuit court ruling came in February. Fenn brought it to her himself, which she understood to be his way of showing respect for the weight of it. He came to the cabin on a cold morning with the documents in his case and sat at her kitchen table with his coat still on because the cabin, though warm, was not as warm as his office. And he walked her through the findings with the systematic care he brought to everything. Court had reviewed all 43 Vane filings. Of those, 26 had been found to contain material errors or inconsistencies, survey measurements that didn't align between filings, notarizations that predated the documents they certified, boundary descriptions that conflicted with original homestead records. The unlicensed surveyor Harlan Fitch had been referred for criminal charges. The notary, whose name appeared on 31 of the 43 documents, had already surrendered his commission and, according to Fenn's contacts in Cheyenne, was cooperating with a separate state investigation. Silas Vane's companies had been ordered to return all properties acquired through fraudulent survey filings. Properties acquired through technically legal, but demonstrably coercive, means Francis Alderman's tract. 2 others with similar unsigned letter situations were the subject of a restitution order that required compensation to be paid from Vane's frozen accounts. Eliza read through it twice. Then she looked at Fenn. Francis Alderman, she said, covered under the restitution order. She won't get the land back. The title transfers are too complex to unwind at this stage, but she will receive payment that reflects the land's actual value relative to the railroad corridor, not the suppressed sale price. How much more? Fenn named a figure that was nearly 4 times what Francis had received. Eliza was quiet for a moment. And the Grubers, she said. They are among the 14 families recovering their land directly. The Gruber sale has been voided on the basis of the fraudulent Fitch survey. He paused. Martin and Rosie Gruber can go home. She looked at the table. She thought about Martin sitting at that table with his hands flat in front of him, as though he needed to keep the table from moving. She thought about Rosie's tin box, everything organized by date. All right, she said. Her voice was steady. All right. Fenn looked at her. He was a man who had seen a great many legal outcomes in 61 years, and he did not pretend this was ordinary. You did this, he said. We did it, she said. I provided the legal scaffolding, he said. You built the case. There's a difference. She didn't argue with him, because it wasn't the moment for that conversation, and also because she knew he was right about the distinction, even if the truth was more tangled than either version of it. She rode to the Grubers that same afternoon. Rosie opened the door before Eliza had fully dismounted, as though she had been watching the road, which she probably had been. Eliza told them in their kitchen, the same table where she had sat months ago, and watched Martin put his hands flat on the surface of what he'd lost. Rosie cried. Not performatively, the tears came out of her without much warning, the way they do when something you've been holding away from yourself finally arrives. Covered her face with both hands and cried for about 45 seconds, and then took them down and said very practically, when can we go back? Fenn says the title transfer paperwork will take 3 weeks. Maybe 4. The house is still there, Martin said. He had not cried. He was sitting with an expression that was too large for his face, and he was managing it by keeping very still. We went past it twice. Just to look. Nobody's touched the house. No, Eliza said. It was the creek corridor they wanted. Not the house. Martin nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want you to know something. He looked at his hands. When you came here the first time, I thought, she's a seamstress. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's going to get herself hurt and not do any of us any good. He looked up. I'm telling you that because I want you to know what I thought and what turned out to be true and what that means about the difference between those two things. Eliza looked at him. Thank you, she said. I owe you more than that, he said. You gave your testimony, she said. That was enough. He shook his head. It wasn't Martin, Rosie said from across the table. Just his name. He stopped. It was enough, Eliza said again quietly. What you did mattered. Everyone who stood up mattered. I didn't do this. We did it. She said it again. The same thing she'd said to Fenn. She meant it both times. Francis Alderman received word of the restitution order by letter. Eliza rode out to her property anyway, because a letter is a letter, and some news sits better when there's a person to receive it with. Francis was in her kitchen when Eliza arrived, and she had clearly already read the letter, because she was sitting with it on the table in front of her, and the expression on her face was the specific complicated expression of someone who has received something good that doesn't entirely fix what was broken. It's not the land, Francis said. No, Eliza said. It's not. Harold worked that piece for 20 years. She looked at the letter. He knew every inch of it. I know. Francis was quiet. But it's something, she said. It's I can repair the roof. I've been putting the roof off for 2 years. She looked up. That sounds small. It doesn't sound small, Eliza said. It sounds like a roof. Francis looked at her for a moment and then made a sound that was almost a laugh, not happy, exactly, but real. The kind of sound that comes when you've been sad long enough that the edges of the sadness start to admit other things. You're a practical woman, Francis said. I've been called worse, Eliza said. Spring came early that year, which the ranchers treated with suspicion rather than gratitude, because an early spring in Wyoming often meant a late frost, and an early spring was not something to celebrate until you'd seen what followed it. Eliza spent the first weeks of March clearing the space in the front room that she had been thinking about since October. The cabin had one room that had always served as both her workroom and the household's main living space, and she had been working from the kitchen table and the work table along the east wall, which was functional but increasingly inadequate. She moved the work table to the center of the room, brought in a second table she bought second from a fan from family on the North Road who was replacing their furniture, and arranged the space so that she had 3 distinct working areas: cutting, construction, and finishing, each with enough room to work without crowding the others. Her mother watched this reconfiguration with an expression that was simultaneously approving and concerned. "You're reorganizing," Mabel said. "I'm expanding," Eliza said. "Into what?" "Into what this should have been 2 years ago," Eliza said. She stood in the center of the room and looked at the space. "There are women in this county who have never had a proper dressmaker. Women whose bodies don't fit the standard patterns that the shop in Cheyenne uses. Older women. Working women. Women who've been told for so long that beautiful clothes aren't made for bodies like theirs that they've stopped asking." Mabel was quiet. "I'm going to make clothes for them," Eliza said. "All of them. Every body, every age, every size. Made to fit the woman, not the other way around." Mabel looked at her daughter. It was the long look again, the one that contained the recognition and the pain and the pride all tangled together. "You'll need more than a reorganized cabin for that," Mabel said. "I know," Eliza said. "I'm working on it." The space on Copper Ridge's Main Street had been empty for 8 months. It had been a hardware annex, then briefly a lawyer's office, then nothing. The landlord was a man named Cavett who was not difficult to deal with once you came to him with the numbers already worked out, which Eliza did. She had money. Not a great deal of it, but enough the broken spur payments, the recovered accounts, and a careful accumulation over a winter of working more hours than was entirely sensible. She also had, which she had not expected, a letter from Howard Fenn informing her that under the circuit court's ruling, the legal fees she had incurred were recoverable from Vane's frozen accounts as damages associated with the fraudulent filing. She sat with that letter for a long time. She hadn't fought Vane in order to be compensated. She had fought him because the land was hers and the fraud was real, and the other families needed someone to stand up first. The fee recovery felt like something arriving from an unexpected direction, the way some things do when you haven't been calculating toward them. She used part of it to pay the remaining balance on Fenn's bill. The rest she put toward the main street space. The sign went up in April. Harroway Dressmaking and Mercantile. She had painted it herself on a board of good pine, in dark blue paint that was almost exactly the color of the dress she had worn to the county hearing. She had done it deliberately, and without explaining the choice to anyone, because it was her choice and it didn't need explaining. Her mother came to see it the morning it went up, walking the 3 miles from the cabin with more energy than she'd had in 2 years, because the cough had finally, fully loosened its grip over the winter, and Mabel Harroway had the look of a woman who has recovered something and intends to use it. She stood in front of the sign for a long moment. "Mercantile," she said. "Notions. Thread, fabric for women who want to sew their own. And finished pieces for the ones who don't." Eliza stood beside her. "I'll need help, if you want the work." Mabel looked at the sign. "I want the work," she said. "Then you're hired. I'm paying you properly." "Don't argue with me about it." "I wasn't going to," Mabel said. Which was almost certainly not true, but she said it, and Eliza let it stand. The first month was hard in the ordinary way that first months are hard, too much to do, not enough of it going right. Customers who came out of curiosity and not yet out of habit. Orders that ran over schedule because she had miscalculated the time certain construction techniques required in an unfamiliar space. Fixed it. She adjusted. She worked until the lamplight was the only thing making it worth continuing, and then worked another hour after that. By June, the shop had 6 regular accounts, and a reputation that was spreading in the particular way that useful things spread by word from one woman to another, in the specific language of "I found someone who actually listened." She made a dress for a woman of 62 who had not bought new clothing in 4 years because nothing in any shop fit her properly. She made work clothes for a ranch wife who was pregnant with her 4th child and had been making do with her husband's old shirts. She made a set of summer dresses for the 3 daughters of a family on the Eastern Road, using the leftover fabric from a larger order because the mother had said quietly, when she thought Eliza couldn't hear, that the girls hadn't had new summer clothes in 2 years. She charged the mother her usual rate. She charged the daughters nothing. She didn't mention it, and the mother didn't ask. That was how she wanted to do it. Not as charity with a face on it, but as a decision made quietly in the back of the workroom, where no one needed to see it happen. Cecily Langford came in on a Thursday afternoon in late June. Eliza was at the cutting table when the door opened, and she knew before she fully looked up that this was not a casual customer. The quality of the hesitation at the threshold gave it away. She looked up and recognized the girl, who was 18 now, and thinner in the face than she remembered, with less of the bright cruelty she had worn in the general store, and more of something that was harder to name and probably less comfortable to live with. Cecily stood just inside the door. "I'd like to have something made," she said. The voice was carefully controlled in the way of someone who has practiced saying a thing before arriving to say it. Eliza set down her shears. "All right," she said. "My mother," Cecily stopped. "I'm coming on my own account, not my mother's." Eliza looked at her. She thought about what it had cost this girl to walk through this door, and she thought about the general store and the laughter and the way Cecily's voice had carried across that room with the easy confidence of someone who had never yet understood what it felt like to be on the other end of it. She thought about what her mother had told her the night of the general store incident, about not letting them have her tears. The girl standing in her shop doorway was not the same thing as an apology. She had not apologized. Eliza was not waiting for one. What she was a customer. "Come in," Eliza said. "Tell me what you're looking for." Cecily came to the counter with the careful steps of someone not sure of their welcome. "I want something for there's a social gathering next month. I want something that's mine, not my mother's taste." She looked at the fabrics on the shelf behind Eliza, and for a moment her face had the quality of someone who is genuinely looking, not performing looking. Something that suits me. Do you know what suits you?" Eliza said. "Not exactly," Cecily admitted. "That's fine," Eliza said. "That's what I'm here for." She picked up her measuring tape. "Stand straight." Cecily straightened. Eliza worked through the measurements with the same focused attention she gave every customer. She asked the question she always asked about color preferences, about the occasions the garment would be worn for, about what the woman felt comfortable in, and what she had always wanted to try. She wrote the measurements and the answers in her order book. She did not mention the general store. She did not forgive Cecily, because forgiveness was something she decided on her own time, on her own terms, and the girl hadn't asked for it. But she gave her the work. She gave her the same honest, careful attention she gave every woman who came through that door. That was its own kind of choice, and Eliza made it fully aware of what it was. When Cecily left 20 minutes later with a deposit paid and an appointment for a fitting, she paused at the door. "Miss Harroway," she said. Eliza looked up. Cecily seemed to be trying to assemble words that weren't quite coming together. She stood there for a moment, with the effort of it visible on her face, which was, Eliza thought, probably the most honest she had looked since she'd walked in. "Thank you," Cecily said finally. "Just that. 3 weeks for the fitting," Eliza said. "Don't be late." Cecily nodded and left. Mabel appeared from the back room approximately 4 seconds later, which confirmed what Eliza had suspected, which was that she had been listening. "You didn't say anything to her," Mabel said. "I didn't need to." "About the store. About what she said." "I know what I didn't say." Eliza picked her shears back up. She knew, too. That's enough. Mabel looked at her daughter for a moment. "Your father would have said something," she said. "He could never let a thing go." "I know," Eliza said. "I let it go. Does that feel right?" Eliza considered the question seriously, the way her mother's serious questions deserved. "It feels like mine," she said. "That's right enough." Wade proposed in August. He did it without theater, which was consistent with everything else about him. They were sitting on the porch of the Broken Spur after supper. They had taken to having supper at the ranch on Thursdays, alternating with the Tuesday suppers at the cabin, pattern that had evolved without either of them, formally noting its evolution. And the evening was warm, and the light was long across the grass, and he said, looking out at the pasture rather than at her, I'd like to marry you if you're willing. She looked at the side of his face. On what terms, she said. He turned then. He had the expression of a man who had expected a question, but not necessarily that one. Terms, he said. Whatever they are. I keep the shop, she said. It's mine, of course. And the homestead. The deed stays in my name. That's your property, he said. It stays yours. She looked at him. Wade, I'm not asking for your permission to keep things that are already mine. I'm telling you that's the shape of it, and I need to know if that's a shape you can live with. He was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he was quiet, that he didn't rush to reassure her, but actually thought about it as a real question. Yes, he said. It is, then yes, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face opened in a way it rarely did in public, the quiet, unperformed version of something large. That's it, he said. What else did you expect, she said. I prepared for more negotiation, he admitted. She smiled, which she didn't do as often as she perhaps could have. I'll save it, she said, for something worth negotiating about. They married in October, in the courthouse rather than a church, with Fenn as a witness and Mabel in a new dress that Eliza had made her in green wool, because it was Mabel's best color, and she had been wearing brown too long. It was not a large wedding, and the town did not line the street for it, and that was entirely fine. What happened afterward was ordinary in the way that good things often are. They were married, and life continued, and Eliza went to the shop in the mornings, and Wade went to the ranch. And on Tuesdays she came to supper at the Broken Spur, and on Thursdays he came to the cabin, except now he stayed. The arrangement was imperfect in the specific ways that arrangements between two strong-willed people who have lived alone for a long time tend to be imperfect. He had habits she found maddening. She had ones he found equally so. They argued about practical things, the order of the workroom, the management of the ranch accounts, a disagreement in the third month that lasted 4 days, and was about something specific, but was really about something larger. The way arguments between people who care about each other usually are. They worked it out, not smoothly, but honestly, which was more durable. What Eliza found, in the first year of it, was that she had been right in her original assessment. He was fair, and he meant what he said. That turned out to be a foundation that held more weight than she had initially calculated. The brown dress was still in the cedar chest. She had taken it out once, in the winter after the shop opened, and looked at it in the afternoon light. The repairs at the elbows were still neat. The side seam was still sound. It was a plain, honest, functional garment that had done its job without complaint. She had thought about burning it in the months immediately after the general store. Not out of shame, she had never been ashamed of it, but out of the impulse to close that chapter, to put it behind her in the most complete way available. She hadn't done it. She had folded it back into the chest, in the particular way of something you are not keeping as a trophy or as a wound, but as a record. Evidence of something true. The woman who had worn that dress into the general store in the summer of 1886 had been poor and working and tired, and her mother had been sick, and she had been walking a hard road for a long time already, and the town had laughed. Eliza thought about that woman, with something that was not pity. She had never pitied herself, and wasn't going to start by pitying a memory, but with the specific tenderness you sometimes feel for a version of yourself, that carried something heavy without putting it down. That woman had kept her dignity in a room full of people trying to take it. She had walked out of that store and done the next thing, and the thing after that, and the thing after that, without waiting for someone to tell her she was allowed to. She had learned, over the years that followed, that most of the things she had waited to be given permission, recognition, belonging were not actually in other people's possession. They were in hers and had been all along, and the only thing that had ever stood between her and them was the energy she was wondering whether she deserved them. She had stopped wondering. That was not a dramatic moment. There was no single day she could point to. It was a gradual realization, the kind that comes from doing things and watching yourself do them, and understanding slowly that you are capable of more than you were given reason to believe. Town had laughed at her size, her dress, her poverty. None of those things had made her weak. They had made her specific. They had made her know exactly what the road felt like under her feet, because she had never had the option of floating above it. They had made her understand what other women carried, because she had carried the same things and knew the weight by name. The shop was full, most mornings, of women who had been told in various ways that they didn't fit the standard, the expectation, the shape that was considered worth dressing. Eliza listened to all of them. She took their measurements and asked her questions, and she made them what they actually wanted, for the bodies they actually had, without once suggesting that what they had was something to apologize for. It was not heroism. It was just work. But it was work that meant something, and she had found, over the course of a difficult and instructive life, that the two things together, work and meaning, were most of what a person needed to stand on. She had land. She had a shop. She had a mother who worked beside her, and a husband who meant what he said, and 11 families along a creek corridor who had kept or recovered what was theirs. She had a cedar chest with a brown dress in it that the town had laughed at, and a dark blue dress hanging on a peg in the back room of the shop that she had made with her own hands for the specific purpose of walking into a room and being seen exactly as she was. Both of them were hers. She had never needed to become smaller to deserve a place in this world. She had only needed to stop standing still long enough for the world to get out of her way. And when it hadn't moved on its own, she had moved it. That was the whole of it. Not a legend, not a lesson with clean edges. Just a woman who had decided that the things worth having were worth the trouble of fighting for, and who had been right about that, and who went to work every morning in a shop with her name above the door, and came home every evening to a life she had built with her own 2 hands. It was enough. It was, in fact, considerably more than enough. It was hers. The circuit court's final correspondence arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, almost exactly 1 year after the hearing. Eliza was at the cutting table when Mabel brought the letter in from the front, still in her coat from opening the shop, holding the envelope with the particular care of someone who recognizes official seals and understands what they tend to contain. "From the circuit court," Mabel said. Eliza set down her shears. She opened it standing at the table, which was how she opened everything important on her feet, ready. The letter was 3 pages. She read all 3 before she spoke. "Vane," she said. "He entered a formal agreement with the state. His companies surrender all remaining claims on the corridor properties. The frozen accounts are liquidated to cover the restitution orders in full." She looked up. "Every family gets what the court ordered. Francis Alderman's payment, the Gruber's title, the Pells, the Deckers, all of them. Paid in full within 60 days. Mabel stood very still. "All of them," she said. "All of them." Mabel sat down in the chair by the window, the customer's chair, the one Eliza kept near the front for women who needed to rest while she worked, and she sat in it with the careful, deliberate movement of a woman who has been standing a long time and is only now allowing herself not to. "Your father would have—" She stopped. "I know," Eliza said. They were quiet together for a moment, the specific quiet of 2 women who have shared a hard road and arrive at a good place on it, and don't need to fill the moment with words to know what it means. Then Mabel said, "You need to tell the families." "I know. Today." "I know, Mama." Mabel looked up with the expression that was trying not to smile and not entirely succeeding. "Then why are you still standing there?" "Told the Grubers first." She rode out on Fletcher in the cold morning air, her breath visible, the valley still and frost-pale around her. And when Rosie opened the door, Eliza held up the letter before she said a word, because she had learned from experience that Rosie read faster than she listened. Rosie read it in the doorway. Her lips moved slightly on the numbers. Then she turned and called into the house, "Martin. Come here right now." Martin appeared from the back room with the expression of a man who has been conditioned by recent years to expect bad news in official envelopes. He read the letter over Rosie's shoulder, and Eliza watched his face go through several things in quick succession disbelief, then a careful rereading, then something that broke open in him quietly and without warning. He handed the letter back to Rosie. He sat down on the porch step, which was not a dignified thing, but it was an honest one, the kind of thing a man does when his legs have simply decided they've been holding him up long enough. "That's it," he said. "It's over?" "It's over," Eliza said. He put both hands over his face. He held them there for about 10 seconds. When he took them down, his eyes were red at the edges, but his voice was steady. I want to shake your hand, he said. You don't have to. Eliza. He stood up. He held out his hand. Let me shake your hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and long, the grip of a man who is putting everything he doesn't have words for into a handshake, because that is the available instrument, and she let him hold it as long as he needed to. The Pells celebrated loudly, which was consistent with who they were. Clara cried while simultaneously trying to feed the youngest, which produced a chaotic, joyful scene that involved the toddler getting into the letter and having to be extracted from it, and Thomas laughing in the helpless way of a man who has been tightly wound for months and is suddenly unwound all at once. We're buying a new fence for the south field, Thomas said, as if this was the most important piece of news he had. Good, Eliza said, and Clara wants chickens. More chickens. She's wanted more chickens for 2 years, and I kept saying we should wait until he stopped. Laughed again. No more waiting. No more waiting, Eliza agreed. Clara looked at her across the table with the direct, measuring look of a woman who has decided she is going to say something true. You came here when we didn't know what to do, she said. You sat at this table and explained it, and we still didn't fully understand it, and you came back anyway. I want you to know I remember that. Eliza looked at her. You testified, she said. That's what mattered. We testified because you showed us we could, Clara said. That's not the same as it being your doing and our doing equally. I know the difference, even if you'd rather not say it. Eliza was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. You're welcome. Clara smiled. It was the smile of someone who has just gotten an honest answer after a long time of receiving modest ones. Francis Alderman was the one Eliza had thought about most, riding between the properties. The others had their land returned. Francis had a payment significant, fair, more than she'd been given originally, but not the land itself. Not the creek piece her husband had worked for 20 years. Eliza arrived to find Francis in the yard, repairing a section of fence along the kitchen garden with the focused competence of a woman who has decided that things in her control are going to be attended to properly. She looked up when Eliza dismounted. She read the letter standing with one hand on the fence post, and when she finished, she folded it very carefully and held it for a moment. 60 days, she said. By the end of January, Eliza said. Frances nodded. She handed the letter back and looked at the fence line. I'm going to fix this whole east run, she said. Been patching it for 2 years. I'm going to do it properly. Good, Eliza said. And I'm going to hire the Pell boy for the spring planting. I've been doing it alone, and I'm 64 years old, and there's no particular virtue in doing alone what could be done better with help. Eliza looked at her. I've been thinking, Frances said, still looking at the fence, about what I'd have done if you hadn't come. If nobody had. She paused. I've sat here with that payment and been grateful it was more than nothing and never known what I actually lost. She turned. You made me know. That was painful, and it also mattered, and I want you to know I'm grateful for both. I'm glad you stayed, Eliza said simply. So am I, Frances said. Now. She gestured toward the house. Come inside. I made biscuits this morning, and you look like you've been writing since dawn. Eliza had been writing since dawn. She tied Fletcher and went inside. Word traveled through Copper Ridge the way word always did, fast, and with varying degrees of accuracy, but landing in the essential truth of it by the time it had made 3 or 4 stops. By Thursday, the families along the corridor knew. By Friday, most of the town knew. By Saturday, Eliza had received 6 notes of congratulation and 1 cake delivered to the shop by a woman she barely recognized, who said only that her cousin was married to the Deckers and left before Eliza could thank her properly. Wade heard it from 2 different people, before he heard it from Eliza, which he mentioned on Thursday evening, with a mild expression that was as close as he came to reproach. I was busy telling the people it directly affected, she said. I'm your husband. You are also going to find out regardless. She looked at him. You're not upset. No, he said, I'm not upset. He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. He seemed to be looking for the word, which he did sometimes, the careful search for precision. I'm glad it's finished. Yes, she said, so am I. Are you? He looked at her. It's been your whole world for the better part of a year. She thought about that, honestly. It was necessary, she said. It's not what I would have chosen to spend the year on. She looked out the window at the November dark. But some things choose you rather than the other way around. And when they do, you can either meet them or you can let them pass and live with what that costs you. In the shop, he said. The dressmaking? That's what I chose, she said. That's what I'll keep choosing. He nodded. He understood the difference between what a person is made to do and what they make themselves. He had always understood that, which was one of the reasons she had married him. Harroway Dressmaking and Mercantile expanded into the adjacent space the following spring. The room next door had been a saddle repair shop, whose owner had retired to live with his daughter in Denver, and the space came available in March at a rent Eliza considered, and then paid without extended deliberation, because she had been watching the shop fill beyond its capacity since October, and the decision was already made in practice, before she made it formally. She put the notions and fabric on the new side, and kept the fitting and construction on the original side, which meant that women could browse and buy without walking through the workspace, which had been an awkward arrangement she had tolerated longer than she should have. Mabel ran the mercantile side with the brisk, organized authority of a woman who has found, at 54 years old, the work she was supposed to be doing. She knew the stock without referring to the inventory book. She knew which fabrics sold quickly and which sat. She developed, entirely on her own initiative, a small lending library of pattern books that customers could borrow for a week at a time, which had not been Eliza's idea, and which turned out to be one of the better ideas the shop produced that year. They hired a girl named Petra in the summer 16, quick with her hands, the daughter of a ranch family on the South Road, who had come looking for an apprenticeship with the directness of someone who has decided what she wants and is going to ask for it plainly. Eliza had hired her on the spot, recognizing something in that directness that was not nostalgia exactly, but was adjacent to it. She taught Petra the way she had wanted to be taught, not by telling her how it was supposed to be done, but by showing her why the reasoning behind the method mattered, so that when something wasn't working, Petra had the tools to understand why, rather than simply following instructions in the dark. Petra was not a perfect student. She had a habit of rushing the finishing work, which was the kind of habit that produced garments that looked right until you wore them twice, and Eliza corrected it 3 times before it corrected itself. But she learned. She learned the way people learn when they actually want to know something, which is differently from any other kind of learning. By fall, Petra could handle a full fitting on her own. Eliza watched her work one afternoon, the way she moved around a customer with the measuring tape, the questions she asked, the way she listened to the answers and felt something settle in her chest that was not pride exactly, but was its quieter, more durable cousin. On a Saturday in October, 2 years after the county hearing, Eliza closed the shop at midday and walked to the cedar chest. She had been thinking about the brown dress for a week. Not with any particular urgency, just with the low, persistent quality of something that is asking to be looked at. Took it out and laid it on the work table. It was still sound. The repairs at the elbows had held. The side seam was tight. It was a plain, honest garment that had done its job and asked nothing in return. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the general store on that July morning. She thought about Beatrice Langford's voice and Cecily's laugh, and the sound of it spreading through the room like something that cost nothing and took something anyway. She thought about standing at the counter with the medicine in her hand and her face burning, and the choice, made in that moment, to give them nothing. She thought about everything that had come from that morning, and everything she had built in the 2 years since, and the 11 families who were on their land, and the women who came to her shop and left with something that fit them the way they actually were. And she thought about Petra in the fitting room, learning to listen before she measured. She folded the dress back up, not because she was done with it, because it was hers, and it was staying. Some things you keep not because they represent your best days, but because they represent the truest version of who you were when things were hard, and that version of yourself deserves to be kept somewhere safe, honored in the particular way of things that carried weight and didn't break under it. Put it back in the cedar chest and closed the lid. Then she went back to work. There were orders to fill, and a fitting at 2 o'clock, and Petra needed guidance on a collar construction that was giving her trouble. And Mabel had flagged a discrepancy in the October fabric order that needed to be resolved before the next delivery. The shop was full of things that needed doing. Eliza Harroway went and did them.